Hello, guys. So today I'm going to read the very popular speeches made by very popular leaders from the history, and because I wanted to improve my communications, to conversations, speeches, good speaker, eloquent speaker, and wanted to become a very persuasive person. So I think it is the right time for me to start reading the great speeches made by a very prominent and a very famous people, which has made a huge impact, not just in history, but even right now. And I think it would not be I think it would be right to say that because of those speeches, they've changed a lot of people's mind, and because of those changes in mind, our, I think, entire history, the current future we are, because of those speeches. I'm not saying directly, but indirectly, because of those things, that there had been a lot of revolutions. People started supporting those people, and then because of those led to revolution, changes in government, all those things. I think we are today because of all those things. We might agree, we might not agree with the content of the speech, but what we have to give it is that they are very persuasive, eloquent speaker. They will convince anyone. So I wanted to become that person later. I can convince anyone by my words, because uh, the best way to fight, I mean, not physically, it has the best way to argue or to fight or any of those things is not with physical, but with the words, but with your ideas, but with your thoughts, but with your persuasions, but with your convincing skills. So yeah, so the first speech that I'm gonna read out loud, it's gonna be a speech by Martin Luther King. And he is an American civil rights activist and a Baptist minister who was a prominent leader of the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. He was born in Georgia, United States, and died. He was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, United States. And his speech, he was known for champions of nonviolence, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest one, at the age of 35. And his most famous speech is the "I Have a Dream" speech, and I'm going to read that speech out loud. So yeah, and I'm going to read the speech. I'll try my best to I'm not going to do with my original voice. I'm going to change my tune, just high pitch, low pitch, because what I understand about the good speaker is that they know when to stop, when to take a pause, when to increase the pitch, when to decrease the pitch. You have to gauge the environment. So I'm gonna because later I want to become good at all of this thing, right? So I'm gonna try it from now only, the speech only. I'm gonna try to change the pitch, high, low, take a pause, and sometimes be aggressive if it requires. Yeah, so I'm gonna start with this. "I Have a Dream" speech by Martin Luther King at the March of Washington, 1963. Excerpts. "I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous day back to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of a Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of the segregation, the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languish in the corners of American society and find himself in exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check when the architect of our republic wrote the magnificent words of Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. They were signing a promissory note to each, which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must forever conduct our struggles on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all the white people. For many of our white people brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victims of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travels, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghettos to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and Negro in the New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and the righteousness like a mighty stream. I say to you today, my friends, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident and all the men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into oasis of a freedom and a justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live a nation where they will not be judged by the color of the skin, but the content of the character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racist, with its governor having its lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with the little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. This will be the day when all the God's children will be able to sing with me new meaning. My country, this of the sweet land of liberty, of the sing land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must come true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltop of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of the New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But only that, let freedom ring from the stone mountains of Georgia. Let freedom ring from the lookout mountains of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from the every hill and molehill of the Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all the God's children, black man, white man, Jewish, Gentiles, Protestant, Catholics will be able to join hands and sing in the last words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. Thank you. The next speech is a speech by Abraham Lincoln, and the speech is known for the place given, Gettysburg Address, and it is delivered at Gettysburg, and it's in the Pennsylvania, and it is given by Abraham Lincoln. So we'll talk about the person. He's the 16th US President, Abraham Lincoln, and serving from 1861 until his assassination in 1865. He led the United States through the American Civil War, defeating the Confederacy and playing a major role in the abolition of slavery. So he was born in Kentucky, assassinated in the Washington, D.C., and he was famous for leading the United States through the Civil War, preserving the Union, and playing a pivotal role in the abolition of slavery. Preserving the Union, abolition of slavery, also known as the Great Emancipator. The Gettysburg Address, American dream, born in a log cabin in Kentucky. Lincoln largely educated himself and rose from profound poverty to become a lawyer and president. This personal story has made him the ultimate symbol of an upward mobility. Assassination. Okay, so this speech is very short, and before going for this, I saw a word So I'm gonna give you a little context of this. So SCOR is score. Score means 20. So in olden times, in English, in olden or middle duration English, they use score to consider as a 2 decade. That means if someone says a score ago, that means it's a 20 years ago. So yeah, that is a little thing that I have to keep in mind. And it was given in 19th November 1863, and it goes like, 4 scores and 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether the nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a large sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow in this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggle here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from those honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that this dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedoms, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. So this is a very short and a very strong speech. And yeah, so this is by the Abraham Lincoln. So the next speech that I'm gonna read is, the speech name is Quit India Movement. Quit India by it is by Gandhi ji. And delivering this address just hours before the British arrested the Congress leadership, Gandhi called for non-violence, mass civil disobedience to demand an immediate end to British rule in India. So it was given in 1942, and after 5 years they got independent. And we'll give you a little context of the person, Mahatma Gandhi, aka Gandhiji. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was an Indian lawyer, anti-colonial nationalist, and political ethicist who employed non-violent resistance to lead a successful campaign for India's independence from British India rule, and later inspired movement for civil rights and freedom across the world. He was born in Porbandar, Gujarat, 2nd October 1869, and he died in 1948, 30th of Jan. Was assassinated by Natram Godse. And so we'll talk about the little story of the Quit India movement. Gandhiji spoke for approximately 2 hours while delivering this historic address on 8th August 1942, because it was a monumental occasion outlining the final roadmap for independence. His remarks were actually split into multiple parts. Okay, so it seems that the text of this combined speech is quite lengthy, spanning roughly 27 pages in written historical archive. So I'm going to read all these 27 pages. I'm going to understand what all has written, and I'm going to understand what all contents are included. So yeah, so the speech goes like, the Quit India speeches, 8/8/1942. Gandhiji is addressing at All India Congress Council in Bombay on 8/8/42, outlining his plan of action in Hindustan as follows. So this is his plan of action. Before you discuss the resolution, let me place before you one or two things. I want you to understand two things very clearly and to consider them from the same point of view from which I am placing them before you. I ask you to consider it from my point of view, because if you approve it, you will be enjoying to carry out all I say. It will be a great responsibility. There are people who ask me whether I am the same man that I was in 1920, or whether there has been any changes in me. You're right in asking that question. Let me, however, hasten to assure you that I am the same Gandhi as I was in 1920. I have not changed in any fundamental respect. I attach the same importance to non-violence than I did then. If at all, my emphasis on it has grown stronger. There is no real contradiction between the present resolution and my previous writings and utterance. Occasion like the present do not occur in everybody's and but rarely in anybody's life. I want you to know and feel that there is nothing but purest ahimsa in all that I am saying and doing today. The draft resolution of working committee is based on ahimsa. The contemplated struggle similarly has its root in ahimsa. If therefore there is any among you who has lost faith in ahimsa or is wearied of it, let him not vote for this resolution. Let me explain my position clearly to everyone. God has vouchsafed to me a priceless gift in the weapon of ahimsa. I and my ahimsas are on our trail today. If in the present crisis, when the earth is being scorched by the flames of hymns to and crying for deliverance, if I fail to make use of God given talent, God will not forgive me, and I shall be judged unwrongly of the great gift. I must act now. I may not hesitate, merely look on when Russia and China are threatened. Ours is not a drive for power, but purely a non-violent fight for India's independence. In a violent struggle, a successful general has been often known to effect a military coup and to set up a dictatorship, but under the Congress schemes of things, essentially non-violent as it is, there can be no room for dictatorship. A non-violent soldier of freedom will cohort nothing for himself, the fights only for the freedom of his country. The Congress is unconcerned as to who will rule. When freedom is attained, the power, when it comes, will belong to the people of India, and it will be for them to decide whom it placed and they entrusted. Maybe that the reign will be placed in the hands of the Parsis. For instance, I would love to see happen, or they may be handed to some other whose name are not heard in the Congress today. It will not be for you then to object, saying this community is microscopic, the party did not play its due part in the freedom struggle. Why should it have all the power? Ever since in its inception, the Congress has kept itself meticulously free of the communal taint. It has always thought in terms of the whole nations and has acted accordingly. I know how imperfect our ahimsa is and how far we have, away we are still from the ideal. But in ahimsa, there is no final failure or defeat. I have faith, therefore, that if in spite of our shortcomings the big thing happens, it will be because God wanted to help us by crowning with success or silent, unremitting sadhana for the last 22 years. I believe that in the history of the world, there had not been a mere genuinely democratic struggle for freedom than ours. I read Kali's French resolution while I was in a prison, and Pandit Jawaharlal has told me something about the Russian Revolution, but it is my conviction that in as much as the struggles were fought with the weapon of violence, they failed to realize the democratic ideal in the democracy which I have envisaged. A democracy established by the non-violence, there will be equal freedom for all. Everybody will be in his own master. It is to join a struggle for such a democracy that I invite you today. Once you realize this, you will forget the differences between Hindus and Muslims and think of yourself as an Indian only, engaged in the common struggle for independence. Then there is the question of your attitude towards the British. I've noticed that there is hatred towards the British among the people. The people say they are disgusted with their behavior. The people make no distinction between British imperialism and the British people. To them, the two are one. This hatred would even make them welcome the Japanese. It is most dangerous. It means that they will exchange one slavery for another. We must get rid of this feeling. Our quarrel is not with the British people. We fight their imperialism. The proposal for the withdrawal of the British power did not come out of an anger. It came to enable India to play its due part at the present critical juncture. It is not a happy position for a big country like India to be merely helping with the money and material obtained willy-nilly from her while the United Nations are conducting the war. We cannot evoke the true spirit of sacrifice and valor. So long as we are not free, I know British government will not be able to withhold freedom from us. When we have made enough self-sacrifice, we must therefore purge our self of hatred. Speaking for myself, I can say that I have never felt any hatred. As a matter of fact, I feel myself to be a greater friend of the British now than ever before. One reason is that they are today in distress. My very friendship, therefore, demands that I should try to save them from their mistakes. As I view the situation, they are on the brink of an abyss. It therefore becomes my duty to warn them of their danger, even though it may for the time being anger them to the point of cutting off the friendly hand that is stretched out to help them. People may laugh, nevertheless, that is my claim. At a time when I may have to launch the biggest struggle of my life, I may not harbor hatred against anybody. Gandhi's address before the IC at the Bombay, delivered in Hindustan, okay, the same. I congratulate you on the resolution that you have just passed. I think this is the second part. I congratulate you on the resolution that you have just passed. I also congratulate that the three comrades on the courage they have shown in the pressing their amendments to our division, even though they knew that there was an overwhelming majority in favor of the resolution. And I congratulate the 13 friends who voted against the resolutions. In doing so, they had nothing to be ashamed of. For the last 20 years, we have tried to learn not to lose courage when we are in a hopeless minority and are laughed at. We have learned to hold on to our beliefs in the confidence that we are in the right. It behaves us to cultivate this courage of conviction, for it enables man and raises his moral statures. I was therefore glad to see that his friends have imbibed the principle which I have tried to follow for the last 50 years and more. Having congratulated them on their courage, let me say that what they asked this committee to accept through their amendments was not the correct representation of the situation. These friends ought to have pondered over the appeal made to them by the Mulana to withdraw their amendments. They should have carefully followed the explanation given by the Jawahar. Had they done so, they would have been clear to them that the right which they now want the Congress to concede has already been conceded by the Congress. Time was when every Musalman claimed the whole of India as his motherland. During the years that the Ali brothers were with me, the assumption underlying all their talks and discussions was that India belonged as much to the Musalmans as to the Hindus. I can testify to the fact that this was their innermost conviction and not a mask. I lived with them for years. I spent days and nights in their company, and I make bold to say that their utterance were the honest expression of the belief. I know there are some who say that I take things too readily at their face value, that I'm a gullible. I do not think I'm such a simpleton, nor am I so gullible as these friends take me to be, but the criticism does not hurt me. I should prefer to be considered a gullible rather than deceitful. What these communist friends proposed through the amendment is nothing new. It has been repeated from thousands of platforms. Thousands of Muslims have told me that if the Hindu-Muslim question was to be solved satisfactorily, it must be done in my lifetime. I should feel flattered at this, but how can I agree to a proposal which does not appeal to my reason? Hindu-Muslim unity is not a new thing. Millions of Hindus and Muslims have sought after it. I consciously strove for its achievement from my boyhood. While at school, I made it a point to cultivate the friendship of Muslims and Parsi co-students. I believe even at that tender age that the Hindu in India, if they wish to live in a peace and amity with the other communities, should assiduously cultivate the virtue of neighborliness. It did not matter, I felt, if I made no special effort to cultivate the friendship with Hindus, but I must make friends with at least a few Musalmans. It was as counsel for a Musalmans merchant that I went to South Africa. I made friends with other Musalmans there, even with the opponents of my clients, and gained a reputation for integrity and a good faith. I had among my friends and co-workers Muslim as well as the Parsis. I captured their heart, and when I felt finally for India, I left them sad and shedding tears of grief at the separation. In India too, I continued my efforts and left no stone unturned to achieve that unity. It was my lifelong aspiration for it that made me offer my fullest cooperation to the Musalmans in the Caliphate movement. Muslims throughout the country accepted me as their true friend. How then is it that I have now come to be regarded as so evil and detestable? Had I any axe to grind in supporting the Caliphate movement? True, I did in my heart of a heart cherish a hope that it might enable me to save the cow. I am worshipper of a cow. I believe the cow and myself to be a creation of the same God, and I am prepared to sacrifice my life in order to save the cow. But whatever my philosophy of life and my ultimate hopes, I joined the movement in no spirit of bargain. I cooperated in the struggle for a caliphate solely on the order to discharge my obligation to my neighbors who I saw was in distress. The Ali brothers, had they been alive today, would have testified to the truth of these assertions, and so would many others bear me out in that it was not a bargain on my part for saving the cow. The cow, like the Caliphate, stood on her own merits as an honest man, a neighbor, a true neighbor, and a faithful friend. It was incumbent on me to stand by the Muslims in the hour of their trial. In those days, I shocked the Hindu by dining time that they now got used to it. Mulana Bari told me, however, that through he would not allow me dine with him, lest someday he should be accused of sinister motive. And so whenever I had occasion to stay with him, he called a Brahmana cook and made special arrangement for separate cooking. Firangi Mahal, his residence, was an old-style structure with a limited accommodations, yet he cheerfully bore all hardships and carried out his resolve from which I could not dislodge him. It was the spirit of courtesy, dignity, and nobility that inspired us in those days. They respected one another's religion, feelings, and considered it a privilege to do so. Not a trace of suspicion lurk in anybody's heart. Where has all that dignity, that nobility of our spirit disappeared now? I should ask all the Mulana, Muslimans, including Qaede Azam Jinnah, to recall those glorious days and to find out what has brought us to there is an impasse. Qaede Azam Jinnah himself was at one time a congressman. If today the Congress has incurred his wrath, it is because the canker of a suspicion has entered his heart. May God bless him with long life, but when I am gone, he will realize and admit that I had no design on Muslims and that I had never betrayed their interest. Where is the escape for me if I injure their cause or betray their interest? My life is entirely at their disposal. They are free to put an end to it whenever they wish to do so. Assault have been made on my life in the past, but God has spared me till now, and the assailant have repented for their action. But if someone were to shoot me in the belief that he was getting rid of a rascal, he would kill not the real Gandhi, but the one that appeared to him a rascal. To those who have been indulging in a campaign of an abuse and vilifications, I would say, Islam enjoins you not to revile an enemy, even an enemy. The Prophet treated even the enemies with kindness and tried to win them over by his fairness and generosity. Are you followers of that Islam, or are you of any other? If you are followers of the true Islam, does it behave you to distrust the words of one who makes a public declaration of his faith? You may take it from me that one day you will regret the fact that you distrusted and killed one who was a true and devoted friend of yours. It cuts me to the quick to see that the more I appeal and the more the Mulana importunes, the more intense does the campaign of a vilification grow. To me, these abuses are like the bullets. They can kill me even as a bullet can put an end to my vibe. You may kill me, that will not hurt me. But what of those who indulge in abusing? They bring discredit to Islam for the fairer name of the Islam. I appeal to you to resist this unceasing campaign of abuse and vilification. Maulana Sahib is being made a target for the filthiest abuse. Why? Because he refuses to exert on me the pressure of his friendship. He realizes that it is a misuse of friendship to seek upon, to compel a friend to accept as truth what he knows is untruth. To the Qaede Azam, I would say, whatever is true and valid in the claim for Pakistan is already in your hands. What is wrong and untenable is in nobody's gift, so that it can be made over to you. Even if someone were to succeed in imposing an untruth on others, he would not be able to enjoy for long the fruits of such a coercion. God dislikes pride and keeps away from it. God would not tolerate a foreseeable imposition of an untruth. The Qaidi Azam says that he is compelled to say bitter things about, but that he cannot help giving expression to his thoughts and feelings. Similarly, I would say, I consider myself a friend of a Muslims. Why should I then not give expression to things nearest to my heart, even at the cost of displeasing them? How can I conceal my innermost thought from them? I should congratulate the Qaidi Azams on his frankness and giving expression to his thoughts and feelings, even if they should sound bitter to hear. But even so, why should the Muslims sitting there be reviled if they do not see eye to eye with him? If millions of Muslims are with you, can you not afford to ignore the handful of Muslims who may appear to you to be misguided? Why should one with a following of several millions be afraid of a majority community or of the minority being swamped by the majority? How did the Prophet work among the Arabs and Muslims? How did he propagate Islam? Did he say he would propagate Islam only when he commanded a majority? I appeal to you for the sake of Islam to ponder over what I say. There is neither fair play nor justice in saying the Congress must accept a thing, even if it does not believe in it, and even if it goes counter to principle it holds dear. Rajaji said, Rajaji said, I do not believe in Pakistans, but Muslims ask for it. Mr. Jinnah asked for it, and it has become an obsession with them. Why not then they say yes to them just now? The same Mr. Jinnah will later on realize the disadvantages of Pakistans and will go further the demand I said. It is not fair to accept as true a thing which I hold to be untrue and ask others to do the same in the belief that the demand will not be pressed when the time comes for settling. And finally, if I hold the demand to be just, I should concede it this very day. I should not agree to it merely in order to placate Jinnah Sahib. Many friends have just come and asked me to agree it for the time being and placate Mr. Jinnah, disarm his suspicions and to see how he reacts to it. I cannot be party to a course of actions with a false promise. At any rate, it is not in my method. The Congress has no sanction that the moral one for enforcing its decision. It believed that a true democracy can only be the outcome of non-violence. The structure of a world federations can raised only on a foundation of non-violence, and violence will have to be totally abjured from the world affair. If this is true, the solution of a Hindu-Muslim question too cannot be achieved by the resort to violence. If the Hindu tyrannizes over the Muslims, with what phase will they talk of a world federations? It is for the same reason that I do not believe in the possibility of establishing world peace through violence as the English and American statesman proposes to do. The Congress has agreed to submitting all defenses to an impartial international tribunal and to abide by its decision. If even this fairest of proposal is unacceptable, the only course that remains open is that of the sword of violence. How can I persuade myself to agree to an impossibility to demand the vivisections of a living organism is to ask for its very life? It is called to a war. The Congress cannot be party to such a fratricidal war. Those Hindus who, like Dr. Munji and Sri Savarkar, believe in the doctrine of the sword may seek to keep the Muslims under the Hindu domination, but I do not represent that section. I represent the Congress. You want to kill the Congress, which is the goose that lays golden eggs. If you distrust the Congress, you may rest assured that there is to be a perpetual war between the Hindus and the Muslims, and the country will be doomed to continue warfare and bloodshed. If such a warfare is to be our Lord, I shall not live to witness it. It is for that reason I say to Jinnah Sahib, you may take it from me that whatever in your demand for Pakistan accords with the consideration of a justice and equity is lying in your pocket. Whatever in demand is contrary to the justice and equity, you can take only by the sword and in no other manner. There is no such. There is much in my heart that I would like to pour out before this assembly. One thing which was uppermost in my heart I have already dealt with. You may take it from me that it was with me as a matter of life and death. If we Hindu and Muslims meant to achieve a hard unity without the slightest mental reservation on the part of either, we must first unite in the effort to be free from the shackles of this empire. If Pakistan, after all, is to be a portion of India, what objection can there be for Muslims against joining the struggle for India's freedom? The Hindu and the Muslims must therefore unite in the first instant on the issue of fighting for freedom. Jinnah Sahib think the war will last long. I do not agree with him. If the war goes on for 6 months more, how shall we be able to save China? I therefore want freedom immediately, this very night, before dawn, if it can be had. Freedom cannot now wait for the realization of a communal unity. If that unity is not achieved, sacrifice necessary for it will have to be much greater than would have otherwise sufficed. But the Congress must win freedom or be wiped out in the efforts. And forget not that the freedom which the Congress is struggling to achieve will not be for the congressmen alone, but for all the 40 crores of Indian people. Congressmen must for ever remain humble as a servant of the people. The Qaid-e-Azam has said that the Muslim League is prepared to take over the rule from the Britishers if they are prepared to hand it over to the Muslim League. For the British took over the empire from the hands of the Muslims. This, however, will be Muslim Raj. The offer made by the Musalman Sahib and Maulana Sahib and by me does not imply establishment of the Muslim Raj of Hindu domination. The Congress does not believe in the domination of any group or any community. It believes in democracy, which includes in its orbit Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Parsis, Jewish, every one of the communities inhabiting this vast country. If Muslim Raj is inevitable, then let it be. But how can we give it the stamp of our assent? How can we agree to the domination of the one community over the others? Millions of Muslims in this country comes from a Hindu stock. How can their homeland be any other than India? My eldest son embraced Islam some years back. What would his homeland be? Porbandar or the Punjab? I asked the Muslims, if India is not your homeland, what other country do you belong to? In what separate homeland would you put my son who embraced Islam? His mother wrote him a letter after his conversions, asking him if he had on embracing Islam given up drinking, which Islam forbids it to its follower. To those who gloated over the conversion, she wrote to say, I do not mind his becoming a Muslim so much as his drinking. Will you, as poised Muslims, tolerate his drinking even after his conversion? He has reduced himself to the state of a rake by drinking. If you are going to make a man of him again, his conversions will have been turned to a good account. You will therefore please see that he is a Muslim, abjure wine and women. If that change does not come about, his conversion goes in vain and our non-cooperation with him will have to continue. India is without doubt the homeland of all the Muslims inhabiting this country. Every Muslim should therefore be cooperate in the fight for India's freedom. The Congress does not belong to any one class or a community. It belongs to the whole nation. It is open to Muslims to take position of the Congress. They can, if they like, swamp the Congress like by their numbers and can steer it along with the course which appeals to them. The Congress is fighting not on behalf of the Hindu, but on behalf of the whole nation, including the minorities. It would hurt me to hear of a single instance of mullahs, Muslims being killed by a congressman. In the coming revolution, congressmen will sacrifice their lives in order to protect the Muslims against Hindus' attack and vice versa. It is a part of their creed, and it is one of the essential of non-violence. You will be accepted on occasion like this, not to lose your heads. Every congressman, whether a Muslim or a Muslim, owes his duty to the organization to which will render a service to Islam. Mutual trust is essential for success in the final nation-wide struggle that is to come. I have said that much greater sacrifice will have to be made this time in the wake of a struggle because of the opposition from the Muslim League and from Englishmen. You have seen the secret circular issued by the Sir Frederick Buckle. It is a suicidal course that he has taken. It contains an open incitement to organizations which crop up like the mushroom to combine to fact the Congress. We have thus to deal with an empire whose way is a crooked. Ours is a straight path which we can tread even if our eyes closed. That is the beauty of Satyagraha. In Satyagraha, there is no place for fraud or falsehoods or any kind of untruth. Fraud and untruth today are stalking the world. I cannot be helpless witness to such a situation. I have traveled all over India as perhaps nobody in the present age has. The voiceless millions of lands saw in me their friend and representatives, and I identified myself with them to an extent it was possible for a human being to do. I saw trust in their eyes, which I now want to turn to good accounts in fighting this empire upheld on untruth and violence. However gigantic the preparation that the empire has made, we must get out of the clutches. How can I remain silent at the supreme hour and hide my light under the bushel? Shall I ask the Japanese to tarry a while? If today I sit quiet under the bushel and inactive, God will take me to task for not using up the treasures he had given me in the midst of the configuration that is enveloping the whole world. Had the condition been different, I should have asked you to wait yet a while, but the situation now has become intolerable and the Congress has no other choice left to do. Nevertheless, the actual struggle does not commence this moment. You have only placed all your powers in my hands. I will not wait upon the Viceroy and pleaded with him for the acceptance of the Congress demands. That process is likely to take 2 or 3 weeks. What would you do in the meanwhile? What is the program for the interval in which all can participate? As you know, the spinning wheel is the first thing that occurs to me. I made the same answer to Mulana. He would have none of it, though he understood its important, import later. The 14-fold constructive program is, of course, there for you to carry out. What more should you do? I will tell you. Every one of you should, from this moment onwards, consider yourself as a free man or a woman and act as if you are free and no longer under the heel of this imperialism. It is not a make-believe that I'm suggesting you. It is the very essence of freedom. The bond of the slave is snapped the moment he considers himself to be a free being. He will plainly tell the master, I was your bond slave till this moment, but I am a slave no longer. You may kill me if you like, but if you keep me alive, I wish to tell you that if you release me from the bondage of your own accord, I will ask for nothing more from you. He used to feed me and clothe me, though I could have provided food and clothing for myself by my labor. I hitherto depended on you instead of on God for food and raiment. But God has now inspired me with an urge for freedom, and I'm a day free man and will no longer depend on you. You may take it from me that I'm not going to strike a bargain with the Viceroy for ministers and alike. I'm not going to be satisfied with anything short of a complete freedom. Maybe he will propose the abolition of a salt tax, the drink evil, etc. But I will say nothing less than a freedom. I repeat, nothing less than a freedom. Here is a mantra, a short one that I will give you. You may imprint it in your heart and let every breath of yours give expression to it. The mantra is do or die. The mantra is do or die. We shall either free India or die in an attempt. We shall either free India or die in an attempt. We shall not live to see the perpetuations of our slavery. Every true congressman or a woman will join the struggle with an flexible determination not to remain alive to see the country in bondage and slavery. Let that be your pledge. Keep jail out of your consideration. If the government keeps me free, I will not put on the government the strain of maintaining a large number of prisoners at a time. When it is in trouble, let every man and a woman live every moment of his or her life hereafter in the consciousness that he or she eats or lives or achieving freedom and will die. If need be, to attain that goal, take a pledge. With the God in your own conscience was witnessed that you will no longer rest till freedom is achieved and will be prepared to lay down your lives in the attempt to achieve it. He who loses his life will gain it. He who will seek to save it shall lose it. Freedom is not for the coward or the faint-hearted. I repeat, freedom is not for the coward or the faint-hearted. A word to the journalists. I congratulate you on the support you have hitherto given to the national demand. I know the restrictions and handicaps under which you have to labor, but I would now ask you to snap the chain that bind you. It should be the proud privilege of the newspaper to lead and set an example in laying down one's life for freedom. You have the pen, which the government can't suppress. I know you have large properties in the form of printing presses, etc., and you would be afraid lest the government should attach them. I do not ask you to invite an attachment of the printing press voluntarily. For myself, I would not suppress my pen, even if the press was to be attached. As you know, my press was attached in the past and returned later on, but I do not ask from you that final sacrifice. I suggest a middle way. You should now wind up your standing committee and you may declare that you will give up the pen only when the India has won her freedom. You may tell Sir Frederick Buckle that he can't expect from you a command performance, that his press notes are full of non-truth, and that you will refuse to publish them. You will openly declare that you are wholeheartedly with the Congress. If you do this, you will have changed the atmosphere before the fight actually begins. From the princess, I ask you with all respect, due to them a very small thing. I am a well-wisher of the princess. I was born in a state. My grandfather refused to salute with his right hand any prince other than his own, but he did not say to the prince, as I felt he ought to have said, that even his own master would have compelled him, his ministers, to act against his conscience. I've eaten the princess salt and prince salt, and I would not be false of it. As a faithful servant, it is my duty to warn the princess that if they will act while I'm still alive, the princess may come to occupy an honorable place in Free India. In Jawaharlal's scheme of Free India, no privilege or the privileged classes have a place. Jawaharlal considers all the property to be a state-owned. He wants planned economy. He wants to reconstruct India according to the plan. He likes to fly. I do not. I've kept a place for the princess and the zamindars in India that I envisage. I would have kept a place. I would ask the princess in all humility to enjoy through a renunciation. The princess may renounce ownership over their properties and become their trustee in the true sense of the term. I visualize God in the assemblage of people. The prince may say to their people, you are the owner and the master of the state, and we are your servant. I would ask the prince to become servant of the people and render to them an account of their own service. The empire too bestows power on the prince, but they should prefer to derive the power from their own people, and if they want to indulge in some innocent pleasure, they may seek to do so as a servant of the people. I do not want the princess to live as a pauper, but I would ask them, do you want to remain slave for all the time? Why should you, instead of paying homage to foreign powers, not accept the sovereignty of your own people? You may write to the political department, the people are now awake. How are we to withstand an avalanche before which even the large empire are crumbling? We, therefore, shall belong to the people from today onwards. We shall sink or swim with them. Believe me, there is nothing unconstitutional in the course I am suggesting. There are, so far as I know, no treaties enabling the empire to coerce the prince. The people of the states will also declare that though they are the prince's subject, they are a part of the Indian nations and they will accept the leadership of the prince. If the latter cast their lot with the people, the latter will meet death bravely and unflinchingly, but will not go back on their word. Nothing, however, should be done secretly. This is an open rebellion. In this struggle, secrecy is a sin. A free man would not engage in a secret movement, and it is likely that when you gain freedom, you will have a CID of your own, in spite of my advice to the contrary. But in the present struggle, we have to work openly and receive bullets on our chest without taking the heels. I have a word to say to the government servants also. They may not, if they like, resign their post yet. The late Justice Rana did not resign his post, but he openly declared that he belonged to the Congress. He said to the government that though he was a judge, he was a congressman and would openly attend the sessions of the Congress, but that at the same time he would not let his political views wrap his impartialities on the bench. He held a social reform conference in the very bundle of the Congress. I would ask all the government servants to follow in the footsteps of Ranade and to declare their allegiance to the Congress as an answer to the secret circular issued by the Sir Frederick Buckle. This is all that I ask for you just now. I will not write to the Viceroy. You will be able to read the correspondence not just now, but when I publish it with the Viceroy consent. But you are free to avert that you support the demand to be put forth in my letter. A judge came to me and said, "We get secret circular from the High Quarters. What are we to do?" I replied, "If I were in your place, I would ignore these circulars. You may openly say to the government, I have received your secret circular. I am, however, with the Congress. Though I serve the government for my livelihoods, I am not going to obey the secret circulars or to employ underhand methods. Soldiers too are covered by the present programs. I do not ask them just now to resign the post and to leave the army. The soldiers come to me, Jawaharlal and the Molana, and say, we are wholly with you. We are tired of the governmental tyranny. To the soldiers, I would say, you may say to the government, our hearts are with the Congress. We're not going to leave our post. We will serve you so long as you receive your salaries. We will obey your just orders, but will refuse to fire on our people. Those who lack the courage to do this much, I have nothing to say. They will go their own way, but if you can do this much, you may take it from me that the whole atmosphere will be electrified. Let the government then shower bombs if they like, but no power on earth will then be able to keep up in the bondage any longer. If the students wants to join the struggle only to go back to their studies after a while, I would not invite them to do it. For the present, however, till the time that I frame a program for the struggle, I would ask the students to say to their professor, we belong to the Congress. Do you belong to the Congress or to the government? If you belong to the Congress, you need not vacate your post. You will remain at your post, but teach us and lead us on to freedom. In all fights of freedom, the world over, the students have made very large contributions. If in the interval that is left to us before the actual fight begins, you even have a little I have suggested to you, you will have changed the atmosphere and will have prepared the ground for the next step. There is much I should like to say, but my heart is heavy. I've already taken up much of your time. I've yet to say a few words in English also. I thank you for the patience and attention with which you have listened to me at, even at this hour late. It is just what true soldiers would do. For the last 22 years, I have controlled my speech and pen and have stored up my energy. Here is a true brahmachari who does not fritter away his energy. He will, therefore, always control his speech. That has been my conscious effort all these years. But today, the occasion has come when I had to unburden my heart before you. I've done so, even though it meant putting a strain on your patience, and I do not regret having done it. I have given you my message, and through you, I have delivered to the whole of India. And this later, the following is the concluding portion of the Gandhi's speech before the. Okay, so the same place he gave speech in English. So in English, it goes, I've taken such an inordinately long time over pouring out what was agitating my soul to those whom I had just now the privilege of serving. I've been called the leaders, or in the military language, the commander, but I do not look at my position in that light. I have no weapon, but love to wield my authority over anyone. I do support a stick which you can break into the bits without the slightest exertions. It is simply my staff with the help of which I walk. Such a cripple is not elated when he has been called upon to bear the greatest burden. You can share that burden only when I appear before you, not as your commander, but as a humble servant. And he who serves the best is a chief among equals. Therefore, I was bound to share with you such thought as were welling up in my breast and tell you in as summary as manner as I can. What I expect you to do is the first step. Let me tell you at the outset that the real struggle does not commence today. I've yet to go through much ceremonial as I always do. The burden, I confess, would be almost unbearable. I have to continue to reason in those circles with whom I have lost my credits and who have no trust left in me. I know that in the course of the last few weeks, I have forfeited my credit with the large numbers of the friends, so much so that they have begun to doubt not only my wisdom but even my honesty. Now I hold my wisdom is not such a treasure which I cannot afford to lose, but my honesty is a precious treasure to me, and I can ill afford to lose it. I seem, however, to be have lost it for the time being. Friend of the empire. Such occasions arise in the life of the man who is a pure seeker after truth and who would seek to serve the humanities and his country to the best of his light without fear of or hypocrisy. For the last 20, 50, 50 years, I have known no other way. I've been humble servant of humanities and have rendered on more than one occasion such service as I could to the empire. And here, let me say, without fear of challenge, that throughout my career, never have I asked for any personal favor. I've enjoyed the privilege of friendship as I enjoy it today with the Lord Linthilngro. It is a friendship which has outgrown official relationship. Whether Lord Linthilngro will bear me out, I do not know, but there is a personal bond between him and I myself. He introduced he once introduced me to his daughter, his son-in-law, the ADC. He was drawn towards me. He fell in love with the Mahadev more than with me and Lady Anna. And he came to me. She is an obedient and favorite daughter. I take interest in their welfare. I take liberty to give out this personal and sacred tidbits only to give you an earnest of the personal bond which will never interfere with the stubborn struggle in which it falls to my lord. I may have to launch against Lord Lindenberg as the representative of the empire. I will have to resist the might of that empire with the might of the dumb million with no limit but of non-violence as a policy confined to their struggle. It is a terrible job to have to offer a resistance to a viceroy with whom I enjoyed such a relation. He has more than once trusted my word, often about my people. I would love to repeat that experiment as it stands to his credit. I mention this with a great pride and pleasure. I mention it as an earnest of my desire to be a true to the empire, with what empire forfeited my trust, and the Englishman who was its viceroy came to Norway. Charlie Andrew. Then there is the sacred memory of a Charlie Andrew, which wells up with me. At this moment, the spirit of Andrew, who was apart me, for me, he sums up the brightest traditions of the English culture. I enjoyed closer relationship with him than with most Indians. I enjoyed his confidence. There was no secret between us. We exchanged our hearts every day. Whatever was in his heart, he would blurt out without the slightest hesitations or reservation. It is true that he was a friend of the Gurudev, but he looked upon Gurudev with awe. He had a peculiar humility, but with me he became the closest friends. Years ago, he came to me with a notice of introduction from the Gokhale, Pearson, and he were the first rank spicemen of the Englishmen. I know that his spirit is listening to me. Then I have got a warm letter of congratulation from the Metropolitan of Calcutta. I hold him to be a man of a god. Today he is a post of me. Voice of conscience. With all this background, I want to declare to the world, although I may have forfeited the regard of many friends in the West, and I must bow my head low. But even for their friendship or love, I must not suppress the violence of conscience, promoting of my inner basic nature today. There is something within me impelling me to cry out my agony. I have known humanity. I have studied something of a psychologist. Such a man knows exactly what it is. I do not mind how you described it. The voice which within me tells you have to stand against the whole world, although you may have to stand alone. You have to stare in the face the whole world, although the world may look at you with the bloodshot eyes. Do not fear. Trust the little voice residing within your heart. It says, forsake friends, wife and all, but testify to that for which you have lived and for which you have to die. I want to live my full span of life. And for me, I put my span of life at 120 years. By that time, India will be free and the world will be free. Real freedom. Let me tell you that I do not regard England or for that matter America as a free countries. They are free after their own fashions, free to hold in bondage colored races of the earth. Are England and America fighting for the liberty of these races today? If not, do not ask me to wait until after the war. You shall not limit my concept of freedom. The English and American teachers, their history, their magnificent poetry have not said that you shall not broaden the interpretations of the freedom. And according to my interpretations of that freedom, I am constrained to say they are strangers to the freedom which the teachers and poets have described. If they will know the real freedom, they should come to India. They have to come not with a pride or arrogance, but in the spite of a real earnest seeker of a truth. It is a fundamental truth which with Indian has been experimenting with for 22 years. Congress and nonviolence. Unconsciously, from its very foundation long ago, the Congress has been building on non-violence known as the constitutional methods. Dadabhai and Fizur Reza, who has held the Congress in India in the palm of their hands, became rebels. They were lovers of the Congress. They were in its masters, but above all, they were all real servants. They never countenanced murder, secrecy, and the like. I confess there are many black sheep among us in congressmen, but I trust the whole of India today to launch upon a non-violent struggle. I trust because of my nature to rely upon the innate goodness of a human nature which perceives the truth and prevails during the crisis as if it by instinct. But even if I am deceived in this, I shall not swear, I shall not flinch. From its very inception, this Congress based its policy on a peaceful method, included Swaraj, and the subsequent generation added non-violence. When Dadabhai entered the British Parliament, Salisbury dubbed him as a black man, but the English people defeated Salisbury and Dadabhai went to the Parliament by their word. India was delirious with the joy. These things, however, India has outgrown. Now, last is I will go ahead. It's the same speech he made. I think he made it for 2 hours. I will go ahead. It is, however, with all these things as the background, that I want Englishmen, European, and all the United States to examine in their heart what crime had India committed in demanding independence. I ask, is it right for you to distrust such an organization with all its background, traditions, and record of over half a century and misrepresent its endeavors before all the world by every means at your command? Is it right that you hook up by crook, aided by the foreign press, aided by the President of the United States of America, or even by the generalissimo of China, who has yet to win his laurels? You should present India's struggle in a shocking caricature. I've met the Generalissimo. I've known him through Madame Sheikh, who was my interpreter, and though he seemed inscrutable to me, not so Madame Sheikh, and he allowed me to read his mind through her. There is a chorus of disapproval and righteous protest all over the world against us, and they say we are erring. The move is inopportune. I had a great regard for the British diplomacy, which has enabled them to hold the empire so long. Now it stings in my nostrils, and others have studied the diplomacy and are putting it in practices. They may succeed in getting through these methods and world opinion on their side for a time, but India will speak against that world opinion. We will raise our voice against all the organized propaganda. I will speak against it, even if all the United Nations oppose me, even if the whole of India forsakes me. I will say, you are wrong. India will wrench with the non-violence or liberty from unwilling hands. I will go ahead for not for India's sake alone, but for the sake of the world. Even if my eyes close before there is a freedom, non-violence will not end. They will be dealing a mortal blow to China and to Russia if they oppose the freedom of non-violence. India, which is pleading with the bended knees for the fulfillment of her debt along with overdues. Does a creditor ever go to debtors like that? And even when India is not met with such an angry opposition, she says, we won't hit below the belt. We have learned sufficient gentlemanliness. We have pledged to non-violence. I have been the author of a non-embarrassment policy of the Congress, and yet today you find me talking this strong language. I will say it, consistent with our honor. If a man holds me by the neck and wants to drawn me, may I not struggle to free myself directly. There is no inconsistency in our position today. And next is the appeal to the United Nations. There are representatives of the foreign press assembled here today. Through them, I wish to say to the world that the United Powers will somehow or others say that they have need for India, have the opportunity now to declare India free and prove their bona fides. If they miss it, they will be missing the opportunity of their lifetime, and history will record that they did not discharge their obligation to India in time and lost the battle. I want the blessings of the whole world so that I may succeed with them. I do not want the United Powers to go beyond their obvious limitation. I do not want them to accept non-violence and disarm today. There is a fundamental differences between fascism and this imperialism which I'm fighting. Do the British get from India what they hold in bondage? Think what difference would make India if it was to participate as a free ally. That freedom, if it is to come, must come today. It will have no taste left in it today. You have the power to help, cannot exercise it today. If you can exercise it under the glow of freedom, what seems impossible today will become possible tomorrow. If India feels that freedom, she will command that freedom for China. The road for running to Russia's help will be opened. The Englishman did not die in Malaya or Burma soil. What shall enable us to retrieve the situation? Where shall I go and where shall I take the 40 crores of India? How is this vast mass of humanity to be aglow in the cause of the world deliverance unless and until it has touched and felt freedom? Today, they have no touch of life left. It has been crushed out of them. it lusters it to put into their eyes. Freedom has to come not tomorrow but today. I repeat, do or die. I pledge the Congress, and the Congress will do or die. So this is a very, very powerful and a very, very long speech. And I read somewhere that the speech went on for so long that I think when he was ending the speech, it was like a midnight. So I mean, you could understand it, right? Okay, it was a long one. It was a very, very, very powerful speech, and I am not exactly sure how audience were. How interested audience were listening, but considering it is the most famous speech of India history, I think there might have been change in a lot of people's heart. So yeah, thank you. Now the next speech is the speech Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat, and it is a speech by Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill, full name Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill, was a British statesman, military officer, and writer who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 45 during Second World War, and again from 1951 to 55. So this speech was made during the Second World War, and the speech it was made by Winston Churchill in the Parliament. And there's a script of the original text, and not just that, there's a recorded speech of him speaking. And okay, let me search. Okay, and it's a famous collection of speeches given by the Winston Churchill, and it was published in 1941. Okay, so book focus the speech. Okay, Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat. His speech for a vote of confidence to form his new coalition government. Okay, so I'll just give you a little introduction of it. Upon his very first entrance into the House of Commons as Britain's new Prime Minister on Monday, May 13, 1940, Winston Churchill only received a lukewarm reception from the Assembly, while at his side, outgoing Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was heartily cheered. Churchill then made his brief statements, which has come one of the finest call to arms yet uttered. It came at the beginning of the World War II, when the armies of Adolf Hitler were roaring across Europe, seemingly unstoppable, conquering country after country for Nazi Germany, and when the survival of the Great Britain itself appeared rather uncertain. So I'll just show you a little of these.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday evening last, I received His Majesty's commission to form a new administration. It was the evident.
So this is the actual audio of this speech, and
in this crisis, but I take up my task with buoyancy and hope. I feel sure that our cause will not be suffered to fail among men. At this time, I feel entitled to claim the aid of all. And I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength.
Okay, so I'll just try to speak. Mr. Speaker, on Friday evening last, I received His Majesty's commission to form a new administration. It was the evident wish and will of the Parliament and the nation that this should be conceived on the broadest possible basis, and that it should include all parties, both those who supported the late government and also the parties of the opposition. I have completed the most important part of this task. A war cabinet has been formed of 5 members representing with the liberal opposition, the unity of nation. The 3 party leaders have agreed to serve either in the war cabinet or in the high executive office. The 3 fighting services have been filled. It was necessary that this should be done in a single day on account of the extreme urgency and rigor of events. A number of other key positions were filled yesterday, and I'm submitting to further list to His Majesty tonight. I hope to complete the appointment of the principal ministers during tomorrow. The appointment of the other ministers usually take a little longer, but I trust that when Parliament meets again, this part of my task will be completed and that the administration will be completed in all respect. Sir, I considered it in the public interest to suggest that the House should be summoned to meet today. Mr. Speaker agreed and took the necessary steps in accordance with the power conferred upon him by the resolution of the House. At the end of the proceedings today, the adjournment of the House will be proposed until Tuesday, the 21st of May, with, of course, provisions for earlier meeting if need be. The business to be considered during that week will be notified to members at the earliest opportunity. I now invite the House, with the resolution which stand in the by name, to record its approval of the steps taken and to declare its confidence in the new government. Sir, to form an administration of this scale and complexity is a serious undertaking in itself, but it must be remembered that we are in the preliminary stage of one of the greatest battles in history, that we are in action at many points in Norway and in Holland, that we have to be prepared in the Mediterranean, that the air battle is continuous and many preparations have to be made here at home. In this crisis, I hope I may be pardoned if I do not address the House at any length today. I hope that any of my friends and colleagues or former colleagues who are affected by the political reconstruction will make all allowances for any lack of ceremony with which it has been necessary to act. I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many months of struggle and suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air. We all, with all our might and with the strength that God has given us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never suppressed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of a human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all cost. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. For victory, without victory, there is no survival. Let that be realized. No survival for the British Empire. No survival for all that the British Empire has stood for. No survival for the urge and impulse of the ages. That mankind will move forward towards its goal. But I take my task with buoyancy and a hope. I feel sure that our causes will not be suffered to fail amongst men. At this time, I feel entitled to claim the aid of all. And I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength. So this is the speech. Thank you. Now the next speech that I'm gonna read is a very popular speech, and it is a speech by Winston Churchill, same guy, and it is, it was in the Parliament, the House of Commons, and the speech name is "We shall fight we shall fight on the beaches, 1940, and we shall not surrender." I think it's a very, very famous speech. I've seen it in some movies also. This, the start of the Second World War, when Churchill became the prime minister of United Kingdom, and he made the speeches, and he moved a lot of people's head, in a sense that he convinced his entire country to go for a war. So yeah, and there is a little clip or the audio version also. I'll just play audio version for a few seconds.
When a week ago today, Mr. Speaker, I asked that practical and reassuring thoughts that what happened in France and Belgium.
So I think it is going to be a little long. So yeah, this is one of my favorite speech. I mean, we could argue about we could debate about whether the person was right or wrong, but I mean, he was a very persuasive person, eloquent speaker. So yeah, I'm going to read it. From the moment that the French defense at Sedan and on the Messieurs were broken at the end of the second week of May, only a rapid retreat to Amiens and the south could have saved the British and the French armies who had entered Belgium at the appeal of a Belgian king. But this strategic fact was not immediately realized. The French High Command hoped they would be able to close the gap, and the armies of the north were under their orders. Moreover, a retirement of this kind would have involved almost certainly the destruction of the fine Belgian army of over 20 divisions and the abandonment of the whole of the Belgium. Therefore, when the force and the scope of the German penetrations were realized, and when the new French Generalissimo, General Weygand, assumed command in place of the General Gamelin, in effort was made by the French and the British armies in Belgium to keep upholding the right of the Belgian and to give their own right to hand a newly created French army which was to have advanced across the Somme in a great strength to grasp it. However, the German eruption swept like a sharp scythe around the right and rear of the armies of the north. 8 or 9 armored divisions, each of about 400 armored vehicles of the different kinds but carefully assorted to be complementary and divisible into a small self-contained units, cut off all the communication between us and the main French armies. It severed our own communication for food and ammunition, which ran first to Amiens and afterward through the Abbeville, and it shore its way up to the Beauce, to Boulogne and Calais, and almost to Dunkirk. Behind this armored and mechanized onslaught came a number of German divisions and lorries, and behind them again they applauded comparatively slower the dull brute mass of the ordinary German army, and German people always were ready to be led to the trampling down in lands of the liberties and comfort with which they have never known in their own. I've said this armored Scythe stroke almost reached Dunkirk, almost but not quite. Boulogne and Calais were the scene of the desperate fighting. The Guards defended Boulogne for a while and were then withdrawn by orders from this country. The Rifle Brigade, the 60th Rifle, and the Queen's Victorious Rifle with a battalion of British tank and 1,000 Frenchmen, in all about 4,000 strong, defended Calais to the last. The British brigadier was given an honor to surrender. He spurned the offer, and 4 days of intense street fighting passed before silence regained over Calais, which marked the end of a memorable resistance. Only 30 unwounded survivors were brought off by a navy, and we do not know the fate of their comrades. The sacrifice, however, was not in vain. At least 2 armored divisions with otherwise would have been turned against the British expeditionary forces had to be sent over to overcome them. They have added another page to the glories of the light divisions, and the time gained enabled the Gravelines waterline to be flooded and to be held by the French troops. Thus, it was the port of the Dunkirk was kept open when it was found impossible for the armies of the north to reopen the communication to the Amiens with the main French armies. Only one choice remained, it seems. Indeed, forlorn, the Belgian, the British, and the French armies were almost surrounded. The sole line of the retreat was to a single port and to its neighboring beaches. They were pressed on every side by the heavy attack and far outnumbered in the air. When a week ago today, I asked the House to fix this afternoon as the occasion for statements. I feared it would be my hard lot to announce the greatest military disaster in a long history. I thought, and some good judges agreed with me, that perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 men might be re-embarked. But it certainly did that seem that the whole of the French army first, the whole of the British expeditionary forces north of the Amiens, Abbeville Gap would be broken up in the open field, or else would have to capitulate for lack of food and ammunition. This was the hard and the heavy tidings for which I called upon the House and the nation to prepare themselves a week ago. The whole root and the core of brain of the British army on which and around which we were to build and are to build the great British armies in the later years of the war seems about to perish upon the field, or to be let into an ignominious and starving captivity. That was the prospect a week ago, but another blow up which might well have proved final was yet to fall upon us. The King of the Belgian had called upon us to come to his aid. Had not this ruler and his government severed themselves from the Allies, who rescued their country from extinction in the late wars, and had they not sought refuge in what was proved to be a fatal neutrality, the French and the British armies might at the outset have saved not only Belgium but perhaps even Poland. Yet at the moment when Belgium was already invaded, King Leopold called upon us to come to his aid, and even at the last moment we came. He and his brave, efficient army, nearly 500,000 strong, guarded our left flank and thus kept open our only line of retreat to the sea, and certainly without prior consultation, with the least possible notice, without the advice of his ministers, and upon his own personal act. He sent a plenipotentiary to the German command, surrendered his army, and exposed our whole flank and means of retreat. I asked the House a week ago to suspend its judgment because the facts were not clear, but I do not feel that any reason now exists why we should not form our own opinion upon this pitiful episode. The surrender of the Belgian German army No, Belgian army compelled the British at the shortest notice to cover a flank to the sea more than 30 miles in length. Otherwise, all would have been cut off and all would have shared the fate to which King Leopold had condemned the finest army his country has ever reformed. So in doing so, this and in exposing the flag, as anyone who followed the operations on the map will see, contact was lost between the British and the two of the other three corps swarming the first French army, who was still farther from the coast than we were, and it seems impossible that any large number of Allied troops could reach the coast. The enemy attacked on all sides with a great strength and fierceness, and their main power, the power of their far more numerous air forces, was thrown into the battle of concentrated upon the Dunkirk and the beaches, pressing in upon the narrow exit both from the east and from the west. The enemy began to fire with the cannon upon the beaches by which alone the shipping could approach or depart. They sowed magnetic mines in the channels and seas. They sent repeated waves of hostile aircraft, sometimes more than 100 strong in one formation, to cast the bombs upon the single pier that remained and upon the sand dunes upon which the troops had their eyes for shelter. The U-boats of one of us sunk, and the mortar launches took their toll of the war's traffic, which now began. For 4 or 5 days, as intense struggle reignited, all their armored divisions of what was left of them, together with the great masses of infantry and artillery, hurled themselves in a vain upon the never narrowing, ever contracting appendix within which the British and the French armies fought. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy, with the willing help of a countless merchant seamen, stranded every nerve to embark the British Allied troops. 220 light warships and 650 other vessels were engaged. They had to operate upon the difficult coast, often in adverse weather and an almost ceaseless hail of a bomb, an increasing concentration of artillery fire. Nor were the seas, as I have said, themselves free from the mines and torpedoes. It was in a condition such as this that our men carried on with little or no rest for days and nights on the end, making trips after trips across the dangerous water, bringing with them always men whom they had rescued. The numbers they had brought back are the measures of their devotion and their courage. The hospital ships which brought off many thousands of British and French wounded, being so plainly marked, were a special target for Nazi bombs, but the men and the women on the board, them never faltered in their duty. Meanwhile, the Royal Air Force, which had already been intervening in the battle so far as in a range would allow from home bases, now used part of its main metropolitan fighter strength and struck at German bombers and the fighters which in large numbers protected them. The struggle was protracted and fierce. Suddenly the scene has cleared. The crash and thunder has for a moment, but only for the moment, died away. A miracle of deliverance achieved by valor, by perseverance, by perfect discipline, by faultless service, by the resources, by skill, by unconquerable fidelity, it's manifested all to us. The enemy hurled back by the retreating British and French troops. It was so roughly handled that he did not hurry their departure seriously. The Royal Air Force engaged the main strength of the German Air Force and inflicted upon them losses of at least 4-1, and the Navy, using nearly 1,000 ships of all kinds, carried over 335,000 men, French and British, out of the jaws of a death and shame to their native land and to the task which lie immediately ahead. We must be very careful not to assign this deliverance the attributes of a victory. It was not won by evacuation, but there was a victory inside the deliverance, which should be noted. It was gained by the Air Force. Many of our soldiers coming back have not seen the Air Force at work. They saw only the bombers which escaped its protective attack. They underrate its achievement. I have heard much talk of this. This is why I go out of my way to say this. I will tell you about it. This was a great trial of strength between the British and the German Air Forces. Can you conceive a greater objective for the German in the air to make evacuation from these beaches impossible and to sink all the ships which were displayed almost to the extent of the thousands? Could there have been an objective of a greater military importance and significance for the whole purpose of the war than this? They tried hard and they were beaten back. They were frustrated in the task. We got the army away and they have paid fourfold for any losses which they have inflicted. Very large formation of a German air force, and we know that they are very brave race, have turned on several occasions from the attack of 1/4 of their numbers of the Royal Air Force and have dispersed in a different direction. 12 aeroplanes have been hunted by 2. One airplane was driven in the water and cast away by the mere charge of the British airplane, which had no more ammunition. All of our 4 types, the Hurricane, the Spitfire, and a new Define, and all our pilots have been vindicated as superior to what they have been at present to face. When we consider how much greater would be our advantage in defending the air above this island against an overseas attack, I must say that I find this fact as a sure basis upon which practical and reassuring thoughts may rest. I will pay my tribute to this young airman as the great French army was very largely for the time being cast back and disturbed by the onrush of a few thousands of armored vehicles. May it not also be that the cause of civilization itself will be defended by the skill and devotion of a few thousand airmen? There never has been, I suppose, in all the history of the world, such an opportunity for the youth, the Knight of the Round Table, the Crusaders, all fall back into the past, not only distance but prosaic. These young men, they're going forth every morn to guard their native land and all that we stand for, holding in their hands these instruments of colossal and shattering power, of whom it may be said that every morn brought forth a noble cause, noble chance, and every chance brought forth a noble knight, deserves our gratitude, as do all the brave men who in so many ways and so many occasions are ready and continue ready to give life and all for the native land. I returned to the army in the long series of very fierce battle, now on the front, now on that, fighting on three fronts at once, battle fought by 2 or 3 divisions against an equal or somewhat larger numbers of enemies, and fought fiercely on some of the old ground that so many of us knew so well. In these battles, our losses in men have exceeded 30,000 killed, wounded and missing. I take occasion to express the sympathy of the house to all who have suffered bereavements or who are still anxious. The president of the Board of Trade, Sir Andrew Duncan, is not here today. His son has been killed, and many in the house have felt the pangs of infliction in the sharpest form. But I will say this about the missing. We have had a large number of wounded come home safely to this country. But I would say about the missing that there may be many reported missing who will come back home someday in one way or another. In the confusion of this fight, it is inevitable that many have been left in positions where honor required no further resistance from them. Against this loss of 30,000 men, we can set a far heavier loss certainly inflicted upon the enemy. But our losses in the material are enormous. We have perhaps lost 1/3 of the men we lost in the opening days of the Battle of 21st March 1918, but we have lost nearly as many guns, nearly 1,000, and all our transport, all the armored vehicles that were with the army in the north. This loss will be impose a further delay on the expansion of our military strength. That expansion has not been proceeding as far as we have hoped. The best of all we had to give had gone to the British Expeditionary Force, and although they had not the numbers of tanks and some articles of equipment which were desirable, they were a very well and finely equipped army. They had the first fruits of all that in our industry had to give, and that is gone. And now here is this further delay. How long it will be, how long will it last, depends upon the exertion which we make in this island. An effort the like of which has never seen in our record is now being made. Work is proceeding everywhere, night and day, Sundays and weekdays. Capital and labor had cast aside their interests in rights and customs and put them into the common stock. Already the flow of munitions have leaped forward. There is no reason why we should not in a few months overtake the sudden and serious loss that has come upon us without retarding the developments of our general programs. Nevertheless, our thankfulness at the escape of our army and so many men whose loved one have passed through an agonizing week must not blind us to the fact that what has happened in France and Belgium is a colossal military disaster. The French army has been weakened. The Belgian army has been lost. A large part of those fortified lines upon which so much faith had been reposed is gone. Many valuable mining districts and factories have passed into the enemy's position. The whole of the channel ports are in his hands, with all the tragic consequence that follows the form that we must expect another blow to be struck almost immediately at us or at France. We are told that here Hitler has planned for invading the British Isles. This has been thought of before. When Napoleon lay at Punklane for a year with his flat-bottom boats and his grand army, he was told by someone, there are bitter weeds in England. There are certainly a great many more of them since the British Expeditionary Force returned. The whole question of home defense against invasion is, of course, powerfully affected by the fact that we have, for the time being in this island, incomparably more powerful military forces than we have ever had at any moment in this war or the last. But this will not continue. We shall not be content with a defensive war. We have our duty to our ally. We have to reconstitute and build up the British Expeditionary Force once again under its gallant commander-in-chief, Lord Gord. All this is in train, but in the interval, we must put our defenses in this island into such a high state of organization that the fewest possible numbers will be required to give effective security, and that the largest possible potential of offensive effort may be realized. On this we are now engaged. It will be convenient, if it is be the desire of the House, to enter upon the subject in a secret session, not that the government would necessarily be able to reveal in every great detail military secret, but we like to have our discussion free without the restraint imposed by the fact that they will be read the next day by the enemy, and the government would benefit by views freely expressed in all forms of the House by the members with their knowledge of so many different parts of the country. I understand that some request is to be made upon the subject, which will be readily acceded by His Majesty's government. We have found it necessary to take measures of increasing stringency, not only against enemy aliens and suspicious characters of other nationalities, but also against the British subject, who may become a danger or nuisance should the war be transported to the United Kingdom. I know there are a great many people affected by the order which we have made who are the passionate enemies of the Nazi Germany. I'm very sorry for them. But we cannot at the present time and under the present stress draw all the distinction which we should like to do. If parachute landing were attempted and fierce fighting attended upon them followed, these unfortunate people would be far better out of the way for their own sake as well as for ours. There is, however, another class for which I feel not the slightest sympathy. Parliament has given us the power to put down fifth column activities with a strong hand, and we shall use those powers subject to the supervision and correction of the House without the slightest hesitation until we are satisfied, and more than satisfied, that this malignancy in our midst has been effectively stamped out. Turning once again, and this time more generally, to the question of invasion, I would observe that there has never been a period of all this in long centuries of which we boast when an absolute guarantee against invasions, still less against serious raids, could we have been given to our people in the days of Napoleon. The same wind which would have carried his transport across the Channel might have driven away the blockading fleet. There was always a chance, and it is still that chance which has excited and befooled the imaginations of many continental tyrants. Many are the tales that are told. We are assured that the novel methods will be adapted, and when we see the originality of a malice, the ingenuity of aggressions, and which our enemies display, we may certainly prepare ourselves for every kind of a novel stratagem and every kind of a brutal, treacherous maneuver. I think that no idea is so outlandish that it should not be considered and viewed with the searching, but at the same time, I hope with a steady eye, we must never forget the solid assurance of sea powers and those which belong to air power. It can be locally exercised. I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once again able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. At any rate, this is what we are going to try to do. That is the resolve of His Majesty's government. Every man of them, that is the will of the Parliament and the nation. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their causes and in their need, will defend the death, their native soils, aiding each other like a good comrades to the utmost of their strength. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of a Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of the Nazi rule, we shall not flack or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with a growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds, and we shall fight in the fields, and we shall fight in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subdued, intoxicated, and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, step forth to the rescue and liberation of the old. Okay, so this is the speech, and the last one, right? The last paragraph. I think this one is like the most famous one. We shall go on to the fight. Okay, I'll repeat. We shall. We shall go on to the end. We shall go on to the end. Okay. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with a growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields, and we shall fight in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until in God's good time, the new world with all its power and might step forward to the rescue and the libertations of the world. So this is a very, very powerful speech. And I mean, when I've listened this in the next speech that I'm going to read out is a speech by Nelson Mandela. And the name of the speech is An Ideal for Which I'm Prepared to Die. I repeat, for an ideal, I'm prepared to die. And the short is I'm prepared to die. And first, let's talk about the Nelson Mandela. And he's an activist. Was born in South Africa, and he was anti-apartheid activist, statesman, and revolutionary who was the first president of the South Africa from 1994 to 1999. He was the country's first black head of the state and the first elected in a fully representative democracy. Okay, so he was born on 18th July 1918, end of the Second World War. Okay, and 5th December 1923 he died. He died in Johannesburg, and children. Okay, so all of these things. And he is famous for leading the resistance against South Africa's system of racial segregation known as apartheid. After enduring 27 years in prison. Okay, after enduring 27 years in prison, he became the country's first black president in 1994, dedicating his life to racial reconciliations and multiracial democracy. His monumental impact is defined by the few key achievements: anti-apartheid activism. So I'm not exactly sure if the listener would know about the apartheid or not. Apartheid means it's like a discrimination. So normally what happens is that we discriminate people in our society. But what if the constitution itself discriminates the minority, or the majority, or based on race, religion, any of that thing, right? So that is known as an apartheid. And okay, so just to be sure, I'll just go and look at the exact definition of apartheid. Apartheid meaning, and it was originated from South Africa, the former official government policy in South Africa. Yeah, so it is the government policy. That means it's in the constitution. The former official government policy in South Africa of separating people of different races and making them live apart. Apartheid, pronounced apartheid, is an African word meaning separateness. Okay, so the name itself means separateness, the origin of the name, right? The etymology of the name, apartheid means separation, okay, separateness. Apartheid is an African word meaning separateness or the state of being apart. Historically, in international laws, it refers to a system of institutionalized racial segregation, discriminations, political dominance by one group, okay, race classification, okay, population registration, okay. So I want to know, right, why South Africa has white population. I mean, their history, population, and their history. I don't know about it, right? I know that a lot of white, but a lot in a sense there's still a minority in South Africa. South Africa, to give you a little context, South Africa is in the most southern tip of the African continent. South Africa white population roughly 4.5 to 5 million people exist because of the centuries of European colonizations, territorial expansions, and immigration. Unlike most other African nations, where colonizers left after independence, the settlers established deep roots, resulting in a permanent and a unique demographic. Okay. And Dutch settlements in 1652. European presence began when the Dutch East India Company established a refreshment situation. Okay, refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope to service spice trades ship. Over time, this employees settled permanently, intermarried with the local indigenous groups, the Khoisans, and enslaved people, and became known as the Boers, farmers, or Afrikaners. They developed their own distinct culture and language. Africans derived from the Dutch. British colonization, 19th century. In 1806, Great Britain seized the Cape from the Dutch. In 1820, thousands of British settlers arrived, establishing a lasting English-speaking white population. The Greater trek and resource booming, fleeing British rules and seeking new lands. Thousands of Afrikaners migrated inland in this movement known as the Great Trek. This displaced indigenous African kingdoms and established independent republics, and later discovered diamonds and golds in the late 1800s. The resources boom attracted a massive influx of European immigrants, and rapidly expanding the white population. Apartheid era, okay, so apartheid era goes to 1948 to 1994. Okay, it lasted for close to half a decade and half a century. In 1948, the Afrikaners-dominated National Party took power and legally institutionalized apartheid, a strict system of racial segregation and white minority rules, while citizens were granted total economic and political dominance over the black majority. And the government aggressively encouraged white immigrations and absorbing white refugees fleeing in newly independent African nations like Angola and Mozambique in the 1970s. Transition to democracy. Due to the intense international pressures and internal resistance, apartheid was abolished. In 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic elections, bringing Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress to power. Unlike in some of the African nations like Zimbabwe or Algeria, where most of the white settlers were forced out, and South Africa negotiated transition power. Okay, today, white South African make up to 7 to 8% of the country's overall population. Yeah, 10% or closer to 10% of the population. They're culturally divided into African speakers, the majority of the white population, and English speakers. Since the early 1990s, many have immigrated to countries like UK, Australia, and Canada, citing crime and economic shifts. Okay, I want to know what is the economic condition of South Africa, and GDP and per capita. South Africa is obviously a developing country because it's a part of the BRICS. South Africa possesses a highly diversified and industrialized dual economy, but it is concurrently burdened by structural crises, including severe wealth inequality and chronic unemployment. Gross domestic product, South Africa nominal GDP sits at approximately $480 billion. That's not less, making it second largest economy on the African continent behind Nigeria. Really? I didn't know about this. Just wait. Nigeria, first white population, just showing. So why not just Lisbon? Okay, the white population in Nigeria is extremely small, estimated at 20,000 to 30,000. Okay, this one is very small. Okay, I want to know about the GDP. They have Nigeria's nominal gross domestic product. This one is officially estimated at 377 billion. South Africa is equal to its 400. So South Africa is higher, right? The second largest economy on the African continent, behind Nigeria, adjusted for purchasing parity. Just wait. Largest economy. South Africa. Yeah, so it's South Africa. South Africa is the largest economy in the Africa with an estimated nominal, this one is to approximate $400 to $480 billion. And second, it's Egypt, 390 to 430 billion. Nigeria, 193 billion. Algeria, Morocco. Okay, and to give you a little context, fun fact, Elon Musk was born in South Africa. He's from South Africa. And yeah, economic indicators and all those things. Okay, financial. Okay, so GDP per capita, the nominal GDP per capita is 7,500. 7,000 is equals to its more than twice of India. But it does seem to me that they have a huge income inequality, extremely unemployment. South Africa is a dual economy. The nation famously exhibits two economics inside one border. A highly advanced, wealthy urban economy exists right alongside an underfunded economy. Nearly 60% of the population lives below the upper middle class, even hideouts. Okay, just wait. Okay, how many states are there? Okay, how many states are there, and which portion has the highest white population? It's very important to know, right? I'm assuming that most of the white populations are rich. South Africa does not have a states. Instead, it has divided into 9 provinces. Okay, the geographic distributions of the white populations depends on whether you look at the total numbers of people in the provinces with the highest white population. The highest total because to Gauteng has the highest total numbers of the white residents. Roughly, this province is the economic heart of the country and contains major urban cities like Johannesburg and Pretoria. South Africa's capital is Johannesburg, right? If I'm not wrong. South Africa, capital city. South Africa is the only country in the world with 3 capital cities which are divided by the government branch. Pretoria serves as the administrative capital, hosting the executive branch. Okay, yeah, it's Cape Town. Yeah, town serves as the legislative capital where the parliament meets, and Bloemfontein serves as the judicial capital, home of the Supreme Court of Appeals. Okay, so it's a Cape Town. Okay, I mean St. Johannesburg. Okay, and okay, this one stand economic hub, Western. Okay, so I just want to see the picture. Okay, white population. Okay, in South Africa. I want to see the picture. Okay. Okay, I'll just type. Okay, is it true that income inequality in South Africa is basically between white population having more wealth, most of the wealth, and black population having the least wealth? I think so. I mean, I want to know who controls the most, right? Yes, it is largely true, but the reality has become more complex since the end of the apartheid. While the racial divide created by history remained the massive foundation of the South African inequality, a major new drivers has emerged: massive wealth inequality within the black population itself. Okay, unequal, so the racial gap with wealth is still heavily white dominated. The legacy of the apartheid systematically blocked the black majority from owning lands, entering capital markets and building generational wealth. Decades later, that structure is still highly visible. The asset divides. The typical black household owns just 5 to 6% of the wealth held by typical white households. White South African still holds a highly disproportionate share of agriculture and private businesses, equity, and stock market. The wage disparity. On average, white-headed household still earns 4 to 5 times more than the black-headed in the same bracket illusions. Even when the black professionals and the white professionals earn the exact same high monthly salary, the white professional household owns a median wealth that is nearly 4 times. Yeah, because it's of the inherited property and all those things, right? The intra-black gap, the new driver of inequality. The biggest change since democracy in 1994 is that inequality is no longer strictly between races. It's now within this one black populations. Black power South African make up to 40% of the country's top income brackets. Okay, but what I want to know, okay, so there's a lot of Indian also highly diverse in a group of wealthy middle class. This one's now consisting of millions of black, white, and Indian citizens who capture 66%. Okay, I want to know. Okay, when did South Africa got independent? I don't know. Do they have independence? Right? Okay. South Africa did not achieve independence on a single date, but rather transitioned through 3 major milestones of liberation. 1910, independence from the Great Britain merged 4 colonies, regional colonies to create this Union of South Africa. They established South Africa as the self-governing dominance, granting it independence over the local affairs, although remained tied to the British Empire. 1961 became a republic. Following a referendum, South Africa officially severed its final constitutional ties with the British to withdraw from the Commonwealth and declared itself independent republic. However, this independence only applied in ruling white minority, as the black majority remained oppressed under the apartheid. This is widely celebrated and true independence of the day for the majority of the South African. On this day, the country held its first fully democratic So in 1994, it is by Nelson Mandela. Okay, now I want to know. Give me an example in policy where it is clear that there was an apartheid. The most undeniable example of an apartheid policy was the Group Areas Act of 1950. The single law legally authorized the government to declare specific geographic areas for the exclusive use of one particular race. It was the foundational policy used to physically tear South African society apart and strip non-white citizens of their property rights. It is exactly how the policy worked and why it proves the existence of apartheid. Mandatory urban segregations. Under this act, the government drew line across maps of every major city. If an area was designated as a white area, all black, colored, and Indian residents living there were legally required to leave. It did not matter if their families had owned houses or businesses there for generations. Staying became criminal. The destruction of the multiracial communities. The most famous applications of this policy occurred in District 6, a vibrant multiracial neighborhood in Cape Town, and Sophia Town, a cultural hub for black writers and musicians in Johannesburg. The government declared this location white areas. Military and police force moved in bulldozers to homeschools. Over 60,000 people from District 6 around were forcibly removed and dumped in a miles into big and an underfunded township. Allocation of the best asset. The policy was structured so that the white minority, 10 to 15% of the population at the time, was allocated over 80% of the Africa's land. Oh, fucking shit. White citizens received all the developed cities, wealthy suburbs, fertile farmlands, and coastlines. Non-white populations were forced into the overcrowded, underdeveloped peripheral areas called township. Other blatant supporting policies. If you look at the wider this one, the Population Registration Act formally classified every single South African into specific racial blocks: white, colored, Bantu, black, or an Asian from birth. Your entire legal life dependent on this classification. The Prohibition of the Mixed Marriage Act made it criminal crime for a white person to marry or have a relationship with the persons of any other race. The Bantu Education Act explicitly designed separate inferior school curriculum for black children, the intention training them solely for the manual unskilled. Okay, I want to know. Okay, before 1994 that thing, who was the president? And is it a president or prime minister? Before 1994, I don't know if the is it okay. F.W. de Klerk was the final state president of the it's a presidential system in South Africa immediately prior to 1994, serving from 1989 until he handed over the power to Nelson Mandela. Because South Africa changed its constitution over 3 years, the country was led by either a prime minister or an executive state president. The prominent apartheid era leaders who ruled the country was two. Last white president under the apartheid, facing severe international sanctions and internal unrest, he unbanned the African National Congress, released Nelson Mandela from prison, and negotiated the democratic insurrection. He served as a national but John during the height of the Cold War and oversee the brutal police crackdowns on this in 1976. Soweto uprising, the administrations focused on. Just wait, I want to see this person's face. F.W. de Klerk, he was the last one. He was born in South Africa, died in South Africa. Okay. I want to see Johannesburg. Okay, so they have it looks fine to me, the area. Okay, it looks, but I don't know, man, like it doesn't look that developed also, but it looks like any other modern city. Okay, so just wait, I want to see the South Africa's population. Let me do some estimates, right? If it's 7 to it says that 6 to 7, around 9 to 10 million white people are there, and if it's 10%, then obviously it should be around 80 million. South Africa's population, around 80 million. South Africa's, so 65.4 million people. It is the 6th most populous country in South Africa with an annual rate of 1.33%. So this is the background of South Africa. Nelson Mandela. Okay, so now Nelson Mandela, I'll be back. He got a Nobel Peace Prize upon his release in 1990s. He worked directly with the apartheid government to dismantle the racist system running the Nobel Prize. Okay, in 1993 alongside President F.W. de Klerk. F.W. de Klerk. He got an F.W. de got Nobel Peace Prize. Yes. Yeah, and F.W. de Klerk was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, sharing the honor with Nelson Mandela. They received the award for the work in peacefully terminating the apartheid regime and laying foundations for the new. He could be there. I don't know. Okay. Does Nobel Prize. Okay, Nobel laureates. Laureates and a prize given every year. I don't know. Is it given every year? Yes, Nobel Prizes are awarded on an annual basis across 6 categories: physics, chemistry, physiology, medicine, literature, peace, economic, science. So there's no thing for us, finance or any of those things. I don't know. And South Africa is a black president promoting reconciliation. Okay, so now let's go and check who is the current. Okay, South Africa current president. Okay, so Cyril Ramaphosa is the current president of the Republic of South Africa. He has held the office since was taken oath in 2018 and was re-elected for a new term by the National Assembly. Okay, I think they follow presidential system. Okay, Cyril. Okay, its president name is Cyril Ramaphosa. Independent, the Phosa, the last Phosa means a young guy. Ramaphosa. Okay, Cyril Ramaphosa. Okay, now I'm going to read the the speech, and the speech is quite long. And I think he gave it for 3 hours. I mean, I can do that too. It's 18 pages long, and the speech name is "An Ideal for Which I Am Prepared to Die." An Ideal for Which I Am Prepared to Die. Speech by Nelson Mandela, given in Pretoria, South Africa, 20th April 1964. I am the first accused. I hold a bachelor's degree in arts and practiced as an attorney in Johannesburg for a number of years in partnership with Oliver Tambo. I'm convicted prisoner serving 5 years for leaving the country without a permit and for inciting people to go on a strike at the end of the May 1961. At the outset, I want to say that the suggestion made by the state in its opening that the struggle in South Africa is under the influence of a foreigners or a communist is wholly incorrect. I've done whatever I did, both as an individual and as a leader of my people, because of my experience in South Africa and my own profoundly felt African background, and not because of what any outsider might have said. In my youth in the Transkei, I listened to the elders of my tribe, telling stories of the old days. Amongst the tales they related to me were those of wars fought by our ancestors in defense of the fatherlands. The names of the Ding Games and Bambata, Hinsta and Makana, Squinty and Dalasil, Mosho, Stew, and Siku Shkuni were praised all the glory of the entire African nation. I hope then that life might offer me the opportunity to serve my people and make my own humble contribution to the life's freedom struggle. This is what has motivated me in all that I have done in relation to the charges made against me in this case. Having said this, I must deal immediately and at some length with the question of violence. Some of the things so far told to the court are true and some are untrue. I do not, however, deny that I planned a sabotage. I did not plan it in a spirit of a recklessness nor because I have any love of violence. I planned it as a result of a calm and sober assessment of the political situation that had arisen after many years of tyranny, exploitation, oppressions of my people by the whites. I admit immediately that I was one of the persons who helped to form Umkhonto we Sizwe and that I played a prominent role in its affairs until I was arrested in August 1962. In the statement which I am about to make, I shall correct certain false impressions which have been created by state witness. Amongst the other things, I will demonstrate that certain of the acts referred to in the evidence were not and could not have been committed by the Umkhonto. I will also deal with the relationship between African National Congress and Umkhonto and with the part which I personally have played in the affairs of both organizations. I shall deal also with the part played by the Communist Party. In order to explain these matters properly, I will have to explain what Umkhonto set out to achieve, what methods is prescribed for the achievement of these objects, and why these methods were chosen. I will also have to explain how I became involved in the activities of this organization. I denied that Umkhonto was responsible for a number of acts which clearly fell outside the policy of the organizations which have been charged in the indictments against us, and I do not know what justification there was for this act. But to demonstrate that they could not have been authorized by Umkhonto, I want to refer briefly to the roots and policy of the organization. I've already mentioned that I was one of the persons who helped to form Umkhonto. I and the other who started the organization did so for two reasons. Firstly, we believe that as a result of the government policy, violence by the African people have become inevitable, and that unless a responsible leadership was given to canalize and control the feeling of our people, there would be outbreaks of terrorism which would produce an intensity of bitterness and hostility between the various races of this country, which is not produced even by war. Secondly, we felt that without violence there would be no way open to the African people to succeed in the struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition to this principle had been closed by legislations, and we were placed in opposite positions by which we had either to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We chose to defy the law. We first broke the law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence when this form was legislated against, and then the government resorted to show of force to crush opposition of its policies. Then only then did we answer to violence with violence. But the violence which we chose to adopt was not terrorism. We who formed Umkhonto were all members of the African National Congress, and behind us was the ANC. Traditions of non-violence and negotiation as a means of solving political disputes. We believe that South Africa belongs to all the people who live in it, and not only one group, be it a black or a white. We did not want an interracial wars and try to avoid it to the last minutes. If the court is in doubt about this, it will be seen that the whole history of our organization bears out what I have said, and I will be subsequently say when I describe the tactics with which I'm going to decide to adopt. I want, therefore, to say something about the African National Congress. The African National Congress was formed in 1912 to defend the rights of the African people, which had been seriously curtailed by the South African Acts and which were then being threatened by the Native Lands Acts for 37 years, that is until 1949. It adhered strictly to the constitutional struggle. It put forward demands and resolution. It sent delegation to the government in brief, in the belief that African grievance could be settled through peaceful discussions and that African could advance gradually to the full political rights. But white government remained unmoved and the rights of the African became less instead of becoming greater. In words of my leader, Chief Luthuli, who became president of the ANC in 1952 and who later awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, who will deny that 30 years of my life have been spent knocking in vain, patiently, moderately, and modestly at a close and batted toast. What have been the fruits of moderations? The past 30 years have seen the greatest numbers of laws restricting our rights and progress. Until today, we have reached a stage where we have almost no rights at all. Even after 1949, the African National Congress remained determined to avoid violence. At this time, however, there was a change from the strictly constitutional means of protest which had been employed in the past. The change was embodied in a decision which was taken to protest against apartheid legislation by peaceful but unlawful demonstration against certain laws. Pursuant to this policy, the ANC launched the Defiance campaign, in which I was placed in charge of volunteers. This campaign was based on the principles of passive resistance. More than 8,500 defied apartheid laws and went to jail. Yet there was not a single instance of violence in the course of this campaign on the part of any defiant. I and 19 colleagues were convicted for the role which we played in organizing the campaign, but our sentence was suspended mainly because the judge found that disciplines and non-violence had been stressed throughout. This was the time when the volunteer sections of the ANC were established and when the word Ama Dila Kufa was first used. This was the time when the volunteers were asked to take a pledge to uphold a certain principle. Evidence dealing with volunteers and their pledge have been introduced in this case, but completely out of context. The volunteers were not and are not the soldiers of a black army pledged to fight a civil war against the whites. They were and they are dedicated workers who are prepared to lead campaigns initiated by the ANC to distribute leaflets, to organize strikes, or to do whatever the particular campaign required. They are called volunteers because they volunteer to face the penalties of imprisonments and whipping, which are now described by the legislature for such an act. During the Defiance campaign, the Public Safety Act and Criminal Law Amendment Acts were passed. The statutes provided harsher penalties for offence committed by the way of protest against laws. Despite this, the protests continued and the ANC adhered to its policy of non-violence. In 1956 and 156, leading members of the Congress alliances, including myself, were arrested on a charge of high treason and charges against the suppression of a Communism Act. The non-violent policy of the ANC was put in issue by the state. But when the court gave judgment some 5 years later, it found that ANC did not have the policy of violence. We were acquitted on all accounts, to which included account that ANC sought to set up a communist state in place of the existing regime. The government has always sought to label all its opponents as communist. This allegation has been repeated in the present case, but I will show the ANC is not and never have been a communist organization. In 1960, there was the shooting at Sharpeville, which resulted in the proclamations of in a state of emergency and declarations of the ANC as an unlawful organization. My colleague and I, after careful consideration, decided that we would not obey this decree. The African people were not a part of the government and did not make the laws by which they were governed. We believe in the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the will of the people shall be the basis of authority of the government. And for us to accept the banning was equivalent to accepting the silencing of the African for all the time. The ANC refused to dissolve, but instead went underground. We believe it was our duty to preserve this organization, which had been built up with almost 50 years of unremitting toil. I have no doubt that no self-respecting white political organizations would disband itself if declared illegal by a government in which it had no say. In 1960, the government held a referendum which led to the establishment of the Republic. Africans, who constituted approximately 70% of the population of South Africa, were not entitled to vote and were not even consulted about the proposed constitutional changes. All of us were apprehensive of our future under the proposed White Republic, and a resolution was taken to hold on all in African conference to call for a national conventions and to organize mass demonstrations on the eve of the unwanted republic. If the government failed to call the conventions, the conference was attended by the Africans of various political persuasions. I was the secretary of the conference and undertook the responsible for organizing the national stay at home, which was subsequently called to coincide with the declaration of the Republic. All the strikes of the Africans are illegal. The person. Okay. this one, as all the strikes by the African are illegal, the person organizing such a strike must avoid arrest. I was chosen to be this person, and consequently I had to leave my home and family and my practice and go into hiding to avoid arrest. They stay at home in accordance with the ANC policy was to be peaceful demonstration. Careful instructions were given to the organizers and members to avoid any resource to violence. The government's answer was to introduce new and harsher laws, to mobilize its armed forces, and to send saracens, armed vehicles, and soldiers into the township in a massive show of the force designed to intimidate the people. This was an indication that the government had decided to rule by force alone, and this decision was a milestone on the road to Unkandu. Some of this may appear irrelevant to this trial. In fact, I believe none of this is irrelevant because it will, I hope, enable the court to appreciate the attitudes eventually adopted by the various persons and bodies concerned in the National Liberation Movement. When I went to the jail in 1962, and the dominant idea was the loss of life should be avoided. I now know that this was still so in 1963. I must return to June 1961, when were we, the leaders of our people, to do? Were we to give in to show of the force and the implied threat against future actions, or were we to fight it, and if so, how? Okay, I want to take it to a little different discussions. Why is it that they didn't revolt it, and the black African did not revolt against the people who are sitting in the power, that means the white, and let them leave the country? Because that time the British were in a big crisis, right? This is exactly what India did, and India got independence in 1947. So, I don't know why, but they could have done that. And right now, I'm not against anyone. Just my small opinion is that they could have controlled right now 100% of the entire territory, in a sense that land, everything has to be redistributed to the black people. And I understand it's not just that. Okay, those who wants to stay, they can stay, right? But why did they have to wait till 1994, 5, for the revolution to happen? They could have done that from way long back, because that time the British were not in a good position to fight against. I don't think they could have fought against the South African, because that time they were declining power. It gradually started 1960, declining power, decline 70, 80, 90. They've started to decline very miserably, right? They could have taken it back, but I don't know. They might be having their own reasons. I must return to June 1961. What were we, the leaders of our people, to do? Were we to give in to show the force and the implied threat against future actions, or were we to fight it, and if so, how? We had no doubt that we had to continue the fight. Anything less would have been abject surrender. Our problem was not whether to fight, but was how to continue the fight. We of the ANC had always stood for a non-racial democracy, and we shrank from any actions which might drive the races further apart than they already was. But the hard facts were that 50 years of non-violence had brought the African people nothing but more and more repressive legislations and fewer rights. It will not be easy for this court to understand, but it is a fact that for a long time the people had been talking of violence, of the day when they would have fight the white man and win back their country, and we, the leaders of ANC, had nevertheless always prevailed upon them to avoid violence and pursue peaceful methods. When some of us discussed this in May and June of 1961, it could not be denied that our policy to achieve a non-racial state by non-violence had achieved nothing, and that our followers were beginning to lose confidence in this policy and were developing disturbing ideas of terrorism. It must not be forgotten that by this time, violence had in fact become a feature of a South African political scenes. There had been violence in 1957 when the women of Zurist were ordered to carry passes. There were violence in 1998 when the enforcements of the cattle culling in Shiku Kunalian. There was a violence in 1959 when the people of the Kato Manor protested against pass rates. There were violence in 1960s when the government attempted to impose Bantu authorities on Pondolands. 39 African died in this disturbance. In 1961, there had been riots in Wombats, and all this time the Transkei had been seething massive unrest. Each disturbance pointed clearly to the inevitable growth among the Africans of the belief that violence was the only way out. It showed that a government which uses force to maintain its rule, teaches the oppressed to use force to oppose it. Already small group had arisen in the urban areas and were spontaneously making plan for the violent forms of political struggle. There now arose a danger that these groups would adapt terrorism against African as well as the whites. If not properly directed, particularly disturbing was the type of violence endangered in places such as the Zurich, Shegukuni Lanst and Pondolanst among Africans. It was increasingly taking the forms not of a struggle against the government, though this is what prompted it, but of a civil strife amongst themselves, conducted in such a way that it could not hope to achieve anything other than loss of the life and bitterness. At the beginning of June 1961, after a long and anxious assessment of the South African situation, I and some colleagues came to the conclusion that as violence in this country was inevitable, it would be unrealistic and wrong for African leaders to continue preaching peace and non-violence at the time when the government met our peaceful demands with force. This conclusion was not easily arrived at. It was only when all else had failed, when all the channels of peaceful protest had been barred to us, that the decision was made to embark on violent forms of political struggle and to form Umkhonto as we seized. We did not not because we desired such a course, but solely because of the government had left us with no other choices. In the manifesto of Umkhonto published in 16 December 1961, which is Exhibit AD, we said, "The time has come in the life of any nation when there remains only two choices, submit or fight. The time has now come to South Africa. We shall not submit, and we have no choice but to hit back all means in our power to defense of our people, our future, and our freedom." This was our feeling in June 1961 when we decided to press for a change in the policy of the National Liberation Movement. I can only say that I felt morally obliged to do what I did. We who had taken this decision started to consult leaders of various organizations, including the ANC. I will not say whom we spoke to or what they said, but I wish to deal with the role of the African National Congress in this phase of the struggle and with the policy and objectives of Umkhonto we sees. As far as the ANC was concerned, it formed a clear view which can be summarized as the follows. It was a mass political organization with a political function to fulfill. Its members had joined on the express policy of non-violence. Because of all this, it could not and would not undertake violence. This must be stressed. One cannot turn such a body into a small, closely knit organization required for sabotage, nor would this be politically correct because it would result in members ceasing to carry out this essential activity, political propaganda as organizations, nor was it permissible to change the whole natures of the organizations. On the other hand, in view of the situation I have described, the ANC was prepared to depart from its 50-year-old policy of non-violence to this extent that it would no longer disapprove of properly controlled violence. Hence, members who undertook such an activity would not be subject to disciplinary action by the ANC. I say properly controlled violence because I made it clear that if I formed the organization, I would at all times subject to the political guidance of the ANC and would not undertake any different form of an activity from that contemplated without the consent of the ANC. And I shall now tell the court how that form of violence came to be determined. As a result of this decision, Umkhonto was formed in November 1961. When we took the decisions and subsequently formulated our plans, the ANC heritage of non-violence and racial harmony was very much with us. We felt that the country was drifting towards a civil war in which black and whites would fight each other. We viewed the situation with alarm. Civil war could mean the destruction of what the ANC stood for. With the civil war, racial peace would be more difficult than to ever achieve. We already have examples in South African history of the result of war. It has taken more than 50 years for the scars of the South African war to disappear. How much longer would it take to eradicate the scars of the interracial civil war, which could not be fought without a great loss of life on both sides? The avoidance of the civil war had dominated our thinking for many years, but when we decided to adopt a violence as a part of our policy, we realized that we might one day have to face the prospect of such a war. This had to be taken into account in formulating our plans. We required a plan which was flexible and which permitted us to act in accordance with the need of the times. Above all, the plan had to be one which recognized civil war as the last resort and left the decision on this question to the future. We do not want to be committed to civil wars, but we wanted to be ready if it became inevitable. 4 forms of violence were possible. There is a sabotage, there is a guerrilla warfare, there is a terrorism, and there is an open revolution. We chose to adopt the first methods and to exhaust it before taking any other decisions. In the light of our political backgrounds, the choices was logical ones. The sabotage did not involve loss of life, and it offered the best hope for the future race relations. Bitterness would be kept in a minimum, and if the policy bore fruits, the democratic government could become a reality. This is what we felt at the time, and this is what we said in our manifesto, Exhibit AD. We of Umkhonto, we CISV, have always sought to achieve liberation without bloodshed and civil clash. We hope, even at this late hours, that our first actions will be, awaken everyone to realization of the disastrous situation to which the national policy is leading. We hope that we will bring the government and its supporters to their sense before it is too late, and so the government and its policies can be changed before matters reach the desperate state of civil war. The initial plan was based on a careful analysis of the political and economic situation of our country. We believe that South Africa dependent to the large extent on foreign capital and foreign trades. We felt that planned destructions of our power plants and interference with the rail and telephone communications would tend to scare away capital from the country, make it more difficult for goods from the industrial area to reach the seaports on schedules, and would in the long run be a heavy drain in the economic life of our country, thus compelling the voters of the country to reconsider their position. Attack on the economic life lines of the country were to be linked with the sabotage on governments, buildings, and other symbolic of the apartheid. These attacks would serve as a source of an inspiration to our people. In addition, they would provide an outlet for those people who were urging the adoption of the violent methods, and would enable us to give a concrete proof to our followers that we had adopted a stronger line and were fighting back against the government violence. In addition, if mass actions were successfully organized and mass reprisals taken, we felt that sympathy for our cause will be roused in other countries, and that the greater pressure would be brought to bear on the South African government. This then was the plan. Umkhonto was to perform sabotage, and strict instructions were given to its members right from the start that on no account were they to injure or kill people in planning or carrying out operations. These instructions have been referred to in the evidence of Mr. X and Mr. Z. The affair of the Umkhonto were controlled and directed by the National High Commands, which had powers of co-options and which could and did appoint regional commands. The High Commands was the body which determined tactics. Targets was in charge of training and finance. Under the High Commands, there was regional commands, and which were responsible for the direction of the local sabotage groups within the framework of the policy laid down by the National High Command. The regional commands had authority to select and target to be attacked. They had no authority to go beyond the prescribed framework, and thus had no authority to embark upon acts which endangered life or which did not fit into the overall plan of sabotage. For instance, Umkhonto members were forbidden ever to go armed into operations. Incidentally, the term High Commands and the regional commands were an important from the importation from the Jewish National Underground Organization, Egrunzwe, which operated in Israel between 1944 to 48. Umkhonto had its first operation on 16 December 1961 when the government building in Johannesburg, Port Elizabeth, and Durban were attacked. The selections of the target is a proof of the policy to which I have referred. Had we intended to attack live, we would have selected targets where people congregated and not empty buildings and power stations. The sabotage, which was committed before 16 December 1961, was the work of the isolated groups and had no connection whatever with Umkhonto. In fact, some of this and numbers of the latest act was claimed by other organizations. The manifesto of Umkhonto was issued on the day that operation commenced. The response to my actions and manifestos among the white population was characteristically violent. The government threatened to take action strong and called upon its supporters to stand firm and to ignore the demands of the Africans. The whites failed to respond by suggesting change. They responded by suggesting a lagger. In contrast, the response of the African was one of the encouragement. Suddenly there was a hope again. Things were happening. People in the township became eager for political news. A great deal of the enthusiasm was generated by the initial success, and people had begun to speculate on how soon freedom would be obtained. But we in Umkhonto were way upon the whites' response to the anxiety. Lines were being drawn. The whites and the blacks were moving into separate camps, and the prospect of avoiding a civil war were made less. The white newspaper carried reports that sabotage would be punished by death. If this was so, how could we continue to keep African away from terrorism? Already scores of African had died as a result of the racial frictions. In 1920, when the famous leaders Masabala was held in Port Elizabeth jail, 24 hours of a group of African were gathered to demand his release were killed by the police and white civilians. In 1921, more than 100 African died in the Bulhoek affairs. In 1924, and over 200 Africans were killed when the administrators of the Southwest Africa had led a force against a group which had rebelled against the imposition of a dog tax. On 1st of May 1950, 18 African died as a result of the police shooting during the strike. On 21st, 1969, of African died at Sharpeville. How many more Sharpevilles would there be in the history of our country, and how many more Sharpevilles could the country stand without violence and terror becoming the order of the day? And what would have happened to our people would that when that stage was reached? In the long run, we felt certain we must succeed, but at what cost to ourselves and the rest of our country? And if this happened, how could black and white ever live together in peace and harmony? This was the problem that faced us, and they were our decisions. Experience convinced us that rebellion would offer the government limitless opportunity for the indiscriminate slaughter of our people, but it was precisely because the soil of the South Africa is already drenched with the blood of an innocent African, that we felt it our duty to make a preparation as long as as a long-term undertaking to use of force in order to defend ourselves against forces. If war were inevitable, we wanted the fight to be conducted on terms most favorable to our people. The fight which held out prospect best for us and the least risk of our life is to both sides were guerrilla warfare. We decided therefore in our preparations for the futures to make provisions for the possibility of guerrilla warfare. An ideal for which I'm prepared to die. An ideal for which I am prepared to die. All whites undergo compulsory military trainings, but no such training were given to the Africans. It was, in our view, essential to build up a nucleus of trained men who would be able to provide the leadership which would be required if guerrilla warfare started. If we had to prepare for such a situation before it became too late to make proper preparations, it was also necessary to build... okay, just wait, okay. What was the word of that thing? I think it was called... Rasabur. I forgot. Clean slate. I think it's called Rasabure. Clean slate in Latin. Tabula rasa. Okay, tabula rasa. Okay, it's tabula rasa. Tabula rasa. I'm sorry.
Tabula rasa.
Tabula rasa. Okay, it's a tabula rasa. Tabula. Okay, tabula rasa. Okay, TABU. Tabula rasa. Okay, I'm back. It was necessary to build on this one, so I decided, okay, it was on this note that I left African beneficial means to administer. Okay, where was I? Understand is all out of this one. Okay, at this stage I decided I should set in the conference of the Pan-African freedoms. Okay, all white community. Okay, it was in our view essential to build up a nucleus of trained men who this one we had to prepare for such a situation before it became too late to make proper preparations. It was also necessary to build up a nucleus of men trained in civil administrations and other professions so that African would be equipped to participate in the government of this country as soon as they were allowed to do so. At this stage, it was decided that I should attend the conference of the Pan-African Freedoms Movement for Central, East and Southern Africa, which was to be held early in 1962 in Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa, where is I think it's in Ethiopia, if I'm not wrong. Addis Ababa. It's the capital of Ethiopia. Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa, yeah, it's the capital city of the Ethiopia, right? Okay, Addis Ababa, okay, and okay, this one stand which was to be held in this one's Addis Ababa, and because of our need for preparation, it was also decided that after the conference, I would undertake a tour of the African state with a view to obtaining facilities for the training of the soldiers, and that I would also solicit or scholarship for the higher education of matriculated Africans. The training in both fields would be necessary, and even if the changes came about the peaceful means, the administrations would be necessary who would be willing and able to administer non-racial states, and so would men be necessary to control the army and police force of such a state. It was on these notes that I left South Africa to proceed to Addis Ababa as a delegate of the ANC. My tour was a success. Wherever I went, I met sympathy for our cause and promise of help. All Africa was united against the stand for white South Africans, and even against stand of white African South Africans. And even in London, I was received with a great sympathy for political leaders such as Mr. Gateskill and Mr. Gremont. In Africa, I was promised, supported by men such as Julius Nyerere, now president of the Tanganyika, Mr. Kawana, then Prime Minister of Tanganyika, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, General Abord, president of the Sudan, Habib Bourguiba, president of the Tunisia, Ben Bella, now president of the Algeria, Modibo Keïta, the president of Mali, Leopard, president of the Senegal, this one is president of the Guinea, President Tuman of Liberia, and Milton Obote, prime minister of the Uganda. It was Ben El Bella who invited me to visit Ojuda, the headquarters of the Algerian Army of National Liberation. The visit, which is described in my diary as one of the exhibits. I started to make a study of the art of war and revolutions, and whilst abroad, underwent a course in my military training. If there was to be guerrilla warfare, I wanted to be able to stand and fight with my people and to share the hazards of a war with them. So notes of lectures which I received in Algeria were contained in the Exhibit 16, produced and evidence. Summaries of the books on guerrilla warfare and military strategy have also been produced. I have already admitted that these documents are in my writings, and I acknowledge that I made these studies to equip myself for the role which I might have to play if the struggle drifted into guerrilla warfare. I approached this question as every African nationalist should do. I was completely objective. The court will see that I attempted to examine all types of authorities from subjects from the East and the West, from this one, going back to the classic work of Clausewitz and converting such a variety of Mao Zedong and Che Guevara on the one hand, and writing of the Anglo-Boer War on the other side. Of course, these notes were merely summaries of the books I read and do not contain my personal view. I also made arrangement for our recruits to undergo military trainings, but here it was impossible to organize any schemes without the cooperation of the ANC office in Africa. I consequently obtained the permission of the ANC in South Africa to this extent, and there was a departure from the original decision of the MC, but it applied outside South Africa only. The first batch of the recruits arrived actually arrived in Tanzania when I was passing through the country on my way back to South Africa. I returned to South Africa and reported to my colleague on the result of my trip. On my return, I found that there has been, had been a little altercation in the political scenes to save the threat of the death penalty for sabotage that have become a fact. The attitudes of my colleague in Umkhonto was much the same as it has been before I left. They were feeling their way, cautiously, and felt that it would be a long time before the possibilities of a sabotage were exhausted. In fact, the views were expressed by sometimes that the training of the recruits were premature. This is recorded by me in the document which is exhibited in 17. After our full discussions, however, it was decided to go ahead with the plans for military training because of the fact that it would take many years to build up a sufficient nucleus of the trained soldiers to start a guerrilla campaign, and whatever happened, the training would be of value. I wish to turn now to certain general allegations made in this case by the states. Before doing so, I wish to revert to certain occurrences stated by the witnesses to have a weapon in Port Elizabeth and East London. I'm referring to the bombing of private houses of the pro-government persons during September 1962. I do not know what justification there was for this act, nor what provocation had been given. But if what I have already said already is accepted, and it is clear that this acts had nothing to do with the carrying out the policy of the Umkhontos. One of the chief allegations in the indictment is that the ANC was a party to a general conspiracy to commit a sabotage. So I've already explained that why this is incorrect, but how externally there was a departure from the original principle led by the ATMC, and there has of course been overlapping of function internally as well, because there is a differences between the resolution adopted in the committee domain and the concrete difficulties arises in the field of the practical activity at large. At a later stage, the position was further affected by the banning and the house arrest and by a person leaving the country to take up political work. This led to the individual having to do work in a different capacity. But though this may have blurred the distinction between Umkhonto and ANC, it by no means abolished the distinction. Great care was taken to keep the activities of the two organizations in South Africa distinct. The ANC remained a mass political body of the African, only carrying on the type of political work they had conducted prior to 1961. Umkhonto remained a small organization recruiting its members from the different races and organization and trying to achieve its own particular object. The fact that members of the Umkhonto were recruited from the ANC and the fact that the person served both organizations like Solomon's Mabanja did not, in our view, change the nature of the ANC and or give it a policy of violence. This overlapping of officer, however, was more the exceptions than the rule. This is why the persons such as Mr. X and Mr. Z who were on the regional commands of the respective areas did not participate in any of the ANC committee or activities, and why people such as Mr. Bennett Masham and Mr. Reginald Nubi did not hear of a sabotage of their ANC meetings. Another of the allegations in the indictment is that Rivonia was the headquarters of Umkhonto. This is not true of the time when I was there. So I was told, of course, and knew that certain of the activities of the Communist Party were carried on there, but this is no reason, as I shall presently explain why I should not use the place. I came here in the following manner. As already indicated, early in 1961, I went underground to organize a May general strike. My work entailed traveling throughout the country, living now in African township, then in country village, and again in cities. During the second half of the year, I started visiting the park town home of the Arthur Goldrich, where I used to meet my family privately. Although I had no direct political association with them, I had known Arthur Goldrich socially since 1958. So in October, Arthur Goldrich informed me that he was moving out of the town and offered me a riding place there. So a few days thereafter, he arranged for Michael Harmels to take me to Rivonia, and actually found Rivonia an ideal place for the man who lived the life of an outlaw. Up to that time, I had been compelled to live indoors during the daytimes and could only venture out under cover of the darkness. But at the Lilius Lake Farm, Rivonia, I could live differently and work far more efficiently for obvious reasons. I had to disguise myself, and I assumed fictitious names of Davids. In December, Arthur Goldrich and his family moved in. I stayed there until I went abroad on 11 January 1962. As already indicated, I returned in July 1962 and was straight in 5th of August 1962. Up to the time of my arrest, Lilius Lake Farm was the headquarters of neither the African National Congress nor Umkhonto. With the exception of myself, none of the officials or members of this bodies lived there. No meeting of the governing bodies were held there, and no activities connected with them were either organized or directed from this. On numerous occasions during my stay at Lilius Farm, I met both the executive committees of the NC as well as the NHC, but such meetings were held elsewhere and not on the farms. Whilst staying at Lefebvre Farm, I frequently visited Arthur Goldrich in the main houses, and they also paid me visits in my rooms. We had numerous political discussions covering a variety of subjects. We discussed ideological and practical questions, the Congress alliances, Umkhonto and its activities generally, and his experience associated in the Palm-March, the military wing of the Haganah. Haganah was the political authority of the Jewish national movement in Palestine. Because of what I had got to know of Goldrich, I recommended on my return to South Africa that he should be recruited in Umkhonto. I did not know of my personal knowledge whether this was done. Another of the allegations made by the state is that the aims and objectives of ANC and the Communist Party are the same. I wish to deal with this and with my own political positions, because I must assume that the state may try to argue from different certain exhibits that I try to introduce Marxism into the ANC. The allegation as to the ANC is false. This is an old allegation which was disproved of the United Treason trial and which has again reared, which has again reared its seats. But since the allegation has been made again, I shall deal with it as well as with the relationship between the ANC and the Communist Party and Mkono in that party. The ideological creed of the ANC has always been the creed of African nationalism. It is not the concept of African nationalism expressed in this cry, drive the white man into the sea. That's not the point, okay? Drive man, this one's okay. Drive the white man into the sea. It is not the concept of African nationalism expressed in the cry, drive the white man into the sea. The African nationalism for which the ANC stand is the concept of freedom and fulfillment for the African people in their own land. The most important political document ever adopted by the ANC is the Freedom Charter. It is by no means a blueprint for a socialist state. It calls for redistribution but not nationalizations of a land. It provides for nationalism, of mines, banks and monopoly industry because monopolies are owned by the one race only, and without such a nationalizations, racial dominations would be perpetuated despite the spread of the political power. It would be a hollow gesture to repeal the gold law prohibition against African when all the gold mines are owned by the European companies. In this respect, the ANC's policy corresponds with the old policies of the present Nationalist Party, which for many years had as a part of the program the nationalizations of the gold mines, which at the time were controlled by the foreign capital. Under the Freedom Charters, nationalization would take in an economy based on private enterprises. The realization of the Freedom Charters would open up the fresh fields for a prosperous African population of all classes, including the middle classes. The ANC has never at any period of its history advocated a revolutionary change in the economic structure of this country, nor has it, to the best of my recollection, ever condemned capitalist society. As far as the Communist Party is concerned, and if I understand its policy correctly, it stands for the establishment of a state based on the principles of Marxism. Although it is prepared to work for the Freedom Charter as a short-term solution to the problems created by the white supremacy, it regards the Freedom Charter as the beginning and not the end of its program. The ANC, unlike the Communist Party, admitted African only as a member. Its chief goal was and is for the African people to win unity and full political rights. The Communist Party's main aim, on the other hand, was to remove the capitalists and to replace them with the working class governments. The Communist Party sought to emphasize class distinction, whilst the ANC seeks to harmonize them. This is a vital distinction. It is true that there has often been close cooperation between the ANC and the Communist Party. But cooperation is merely a proof of a common goal. In this case, the removal of white supremacy, and it is not a proof of complete communist of in a community of interest. The history of the world is full of similar examples. Perhaps the most striking illustration is to be found in the cooperation between the Great Britain, the United States of America, and the Soviet Union in the fight against the Hitlers. Nobody but Hitler would have dared to suggest that such a cooperation turned Churchill or Roosevelt into the communist rule, so that Britain and America were working to bring about a communist world. Another instance of such a cooperation is to be found precisely in the Umkhondos. Shortly after Umkhondo was constituted, I was informed by some of its members that the Communist Party would support Umkhondos, and this is then occurred. At a later stage, the support was made openly. I believe that communists have always played an active role in the fight by the colonial countries for their freedoms, because the short-term object of the communism would always correspond with the longer-term in this one. The communists have played an important role in the freedom struggle fight in the countries such as Malaya, Algeria, and Indonesia. None of the states today are communists. And similarly, in the underground resistance movement, which sprung up in Europe during the last World War, communists played important roles. Even General Chiang Kai-shek, today one of the bitterest enemies of the communism, fought together with the communists against the ruling class in the struggle, which led to his assumption of power in China in 1930s. This pattern of cooperation between communist and non-communist has been repeated in the National Liberation Movement of South Africa. Prior to the banning of the Communist Party, joint campaign involving the Communist Party and the Congress movement were accepted, practiced. African communists could and did become members of the ANCs, and some served in the national, provincial, and local committees. Among those who served in the national executive as the Albert Nazula, a former secretary of the Communist Party, Moses Konta, another former secretary, and J.B. Marks, a former members of the Central Committee. I joined the AMC in 1944, and in my younger days, I held the view that the policy of the admitting communists to the ANC and the close cooperation which existed at the time on specific issues between the ANC and the Communist Party would lead to a watering down of the concept of African nationalism. At that stage, I was a member of the African National Congress Youth League and was one of the group which moved for the expulsion of the communists from the ANC. Thus, this proposal was heavily defeated. Amongst those who voted against the proposals were some of the most conservative section of the African political opinion. They defended the policy on the ground that from its inception, the ANC was formed and built up not as a political party with one school of political thoughts, but as a parliament of the African people, accommodating people of various political conviction, all united by the common goal of the national liberations. I was eventually won over it to the point of view, and I have upheld it ever since. It is perhaps difficult for white South Africans with an ingrained prejudice against communism to understand why experienced African politicians so readily accept communists as their friends. But to us, the reason is obvious. The theoretical differences, theoretical differences amongst those fighting against cooperation is a luxury we cannot afford at this stage. What is more, for many decades, communists were the only political group in South Africa who were prepared to treat African as a human being and their equals, who were prepared to eat with us, talk with us, live with us, and work with us. They were the only political group which was prepared to work with the Africans for the attainments of the political rights and stake in the society. Because of this, there are many Africans who today tend to equate freedoms with their communism. They are supported in the belief by the legislature, which bans exponents of a democratic governments in African freedom as a communist and bans many of them who are not communists under the suppressions of the Communist Acts. Although I have never been a member of the communist, I myself have been named under the Pernicious Act because of the role I play in the Defiance campaign. I've also been banned and imprisoned under the Act. It is not only in internal politics that we count communists as amongst those who support our caste. In the international field, communist countries have always come to our aids. In the United Nations and other councils of the world, the communist bloc has supported the Afro-Asian struggle against the colonialism and often seems to be more sympathetic to our plight than some of the Western powers, although there is a universal condemnation of the apartheid. The communist bloc speaks out against it with a louder voice than most of the white world. In this circumstances, it would take a brash young politician such as I was in 1949 to proclaim that the communists are our enemies. I turn now to my own position. I have denied that I am a communist, and I've denied that I am a communist, and I think that in the circumstances I am obliged to state exactly what my political beliefs are. I have always regarded myself in the first place as an African patriot. After all, I was born in the Umtata for 46 years ago. My guardian was my cousin Stan, who was the acting paramount chief of the Tembulan, and I am related both to the present paramount chief of the Tembulan, Sabata Talingone, and to Kaiser Mantamenzima, the chief minister of the Transkia. Today, I am attracted by the idea of a classless society and attraction. What? Today, I'm attracted by the idea of a classless society and attractions which swings me part from the Marxist reading and in part from my admirations of the structure and organizations of early African society in this country, the land. When the means of production belonged to the tribe, there were no rich or poor and there were no exploitations. It is true, as I have already stated, that I have been influenced by the Marxist thoughts. But this is also true of many leaders of the world new independent states, such as widely different person as Gandhi, Nehru, Nurma, Nasir. All acknowledge this fact. We all accept the need for some form of a socialism to enable our people to catch up with the advanced countries of this world and to overcome the legacy and extreme poverty. But this does not mean we are Marxists, right? Indeed, for my own part, I believe that it is open to debate whether the Communist Party has any specific role to play at this particular stage of our political struggle. The basic task at the present moment is the removal of the race discriminations and the attainment of the democratic rights on the basis of the Freedom Charter. And so far as that party furnishes this task, I welcome its assistance. I realize that it is one of the means by which people of all races can be drawn into our struggle. From my reading of Marxist literature and from my conversation with the Marxists, I have gained the impression that communists regard the parliamentary system of the West as undemocratic and reactionary. But on the contrary, I'm an admirer of such a system. The Magna Carta, the Petition of Rights, and the Bill of Rights are documents which are held in venerations by Democrats throughout the world. I have a great respect for British political institutions and for the country's system of justice. I regard the British Parliament as the most democratic institution in the world, and the independence and the impartiality of this judiciary never fails to arouse my admirations. In the American Congress, that country's doctrine of separation of power as well as the independence of the judiciary arouses in me similar sentiments. I have been influenced in my thinking by both West and East. All this has led me to feel that in my research for a political formula, I should be absolutely impartial and objective. I should tie myself to no particular system of society other than of a socialism. I must leave myself free to borrow the best from the West and the East. That's the best thing, right? Just try to pick the best from all the places. There are certain exhibits to which suggest that we receive financial support, support from abroad, and I wish to deal with these questions. Our political struggle has always been financed from internal sources, from funds raised by our own people and by our own supporters. Whenever we had a special campaign or an important political cases, for example, the treason trial, we received financial assistance from sympathetic individuals and organizations in the Western countries. We had never felt it necessary to go beyond the sources. But when in 1961, the Umkhonto was formed and a new phase of struggle introduced, we realized that these events would make a heavy call on our slender resources and that the scale of our activities would be hampered by the lack of funds. One of my instructions as I went abroad in Jan 1962 was to raise funds from the African states. I must admit, whilst, okay, what is whilst? Whilst, I think I know it. It's not whilst, right? Okay. During that time, okay, whilst is a conjunction that means during the time that, at the same time, or although it is a slightly, okay, time. She listened to music whilst during the time she was studying. Okay, it's like a while. Is while same? Is while and while same? Yes, while and whilst means the same thing, and it can be used interchangeably to show time. Okay, this one's okay. While.
Yes, while and whilst mean.
Okay, whilst. Okay, the pronunciation, correct pronunciation. Almost every single of the areas which had still not gained independence had received all from this ones. Okay, where was I apart? Okay. I must add that whilst abroad, I had discussion with the leaders of the political movement in Africa and discovered that almost every single one of them in areas which had still not attained independence had received all forms of assistance from the socialist countries as well as from the West, including that of financial supports. I also discovered that some well-known African states, all of them non-communist, even anti-communist, had received similar assistance. On my return to the Republic, I made a strong recommendation to the ANC that we should not confine ourselves to the Africa and the Western countries, that we should also send a mission to the socialist countries to raise the funds which were so urgently needed. I've been told that after I was convicted, such as a mission was sent. I am not prepared to name any countries to which it went, nor am I at liberty to disclose the names of the organizations and countries which we gave as a support or promise to do so. As I understand the state cases, and in particular the evidence of Mr. X, the suggestion is that Umkhonto was the inspirations of the Communist Party, which sought by playing upon imaginary grievance to enroll the African people into an army which ostensibly was fight for African freedoms, but in reality was fighting for the communist states. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the suggestion is preposterous. Umkhonto was formed by the African to further the struggle for freedoms in their own lands. Communists and others supported the movement, and we only wish that more sections of the community would join us. Our fight is against the real and not imaginary hardship, or to use the language of the state prosecutors, or so-called hardship. Basically, we fight against the two features which are the hallmark of the African line in South Africa and which are entrenched by the legislations which we seek to have repealed. These features are poverty and lack of human dignity, and we do not need communist or so-called agitators to teach us about any of these things. South Africa is the richest country in Africa and could be one of the richest countries in the world, but it is a land of extreme and remarkable contrast. The whites enjoy what may well be the high standards of living in the world, and whilst Africans live in a poverty and misery, 40% of the African live in a hopelessly overcrowded and in some cases drought-stricken reserve where soil erosions and the overworking of the soil makes it impossible for them to live properly off the land. 30% are laborers, labor tenants and squatters on a wide farms and work and live under conditions similar to those of the serfs of the Middle Ages. The other 30% live in towns where they had developed economic and social habits, which brings them closer in many respects to the white standards. Yet most African, even in this group, are impoverished by low incomes and high cost of living. The highest paid and the most prosperous section of the urban life in African life is in Johannesburg, yet their actual position is desperate. The latest figure were given 20 March 1964 by Mark, managers of the Johannesburg Non-European Affairs Department, that the poverty datum line for the average African family in Johannesburg, according to Mr. K Department, is 42.84 per month. He showed that the average monthly wage is, okay, just wait, okay, what is the currency of South Africa? It's South African Rand. Okay, it's called Rand. Okay, so their currency is more valuable in a sense that it's higher than us, man. Okay, Rand. It's known as a Rand. Okay, a South African Rand. SAR. Okay, it's Rand. 42.84 per month, and they show that the average monthly wage is Rand 32.24, and that's 46% of all African families in the Johannesburg do not earn enough to keep them going. Poverty goes hand in hand with the malnutrition and disease. The incidence of malnutrition and the deficiency diseases are very high amongst Africans. Tuberculosis, pellagra, Kawasaki, gastroenteritis, and scurvy breathing bring death and destruction of the health. The incidence of the infant mortality is one of the highest in the world. According to the medical officer of the health for Pretoria, tuberculosis kills 40 people a day, almost all Africans, and in 1961 there were 58,491 new cases reported. This disease not only destroys the vital organs of the body, but they result in retarded mental conditions and lack of initiative and reduces power by concentration. The second result of such conditions affect the whole community instead of the work performed by the African laborers. Complaints of African, however, it is not only that they are poor and the whites are rich, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this situation. There are only two ways to break out of poverty. The first is by formal education, and the second is by the worker acquiring a greater skill at his work and thus higher wages. As far as African are concerned, both these avenues of advancements are deliberately curtailed by the legislations. The present government has always sought to hamper African in their search for education. One of the early acts after coming to the power as was to stop subsidies for the African school feeding. Many African children who attended school depend on this supplement of their diet. This was a cruel act. There is a compulsory education for all the white children at virtually no cost to their parents, be they rich, poor. Similar facilities are not provided for the African children, though there are some who receive such assistance. African children, however, generally have to pay more for their schooling than whites. According to the figure quoted by the South African Institute of Race Relations in its 1960 journals, approximately 40% of the African children in the age group between 7 to 14 do not attend schools. For those who do not attend school, their standards are vastly different from those afforded to the white children. In 1960-61, the per capita government spending on African students at the state aid schools was estimated at Rand 12.46. In the same year, the per capita spending on the white children in this one of those two was 144.57. Although there were no figure available to me, it can be stated without doubt that the white children on whom 144.57 rands per head was being spent all came from the wealthier home than African children on whom 12.46 rand per head was being spent. That is more than 10 times. The quality of education is also different. According to the Bantu Education Journals, only 5,660 African children in the whole of South Africa passed the junior certificate in 1962, and in that year only 363 passed matrix. This is presumably consistent with the policy of the Bantu Education about which the present Prime Minister said during the debate on the Bantu Education Bill 1953. When I have control of the native education, I will reform it so that native people will taught from the childhood to realize that equality with European is not from them. People who believe in equality are not desirable teachers for our natives. When my department controls native education, it will know for what class of higher education a native is fitted and whether he will have a chance in life to use his knowledge. And the main obstacle to the economic advancement of the African is the industrial color bar, under which all the better jobs of industries are reserved for a white only. Moreover, Africans who do not obtain employment in the unskilled and semi-skilled occupation which are open to them are not allowed to form a trade union which have recognition under the Industrial Conciliations Act. This means that strikes of African workers are illegal and that they are denied the rights of the collective bargaining which is permitted to the better paid white workers. The discrimination in the policy of the successive South African governments towards African workers is demonstrated by the so-called civilized labor policy under which sheltered, unskilled government jobs are found for those white workers who cannot make the degrading industry in a wage which exceeds this one earning of the average African employee in the industry. The government often answers its critique by saying that African in South Africa are economically better off than the inhabitants of the countries in Africa. I do not know whether this statement is true and doubt whether any comparison can be made without having regard to the cost of living index in such countries. But even if it is true, as far as the African people are concerned, it is irrelevant. A complaint is not that we are poor by comparison with the people in other countries, but that we are poor by comparison with the white people in our own country, and that we are prevented by legislation from altering this imbalance. The lack of human dignity experienced by African is the direct result of the policy of the white supremacy. White supremacy implies black inferiority. Legislations designed to preserve white supremacy entrench this notion. Menial tasks in South Africa are invariably performed by the Africans. When anything has to be carried or cleaned, the white man will look around for an African to do it for him. So whether the African is employed by him or not, because of this sort of an attitude, white tends to regard African as a separate breeds. They do not look upon them as the people with the families of their own. They do not realize that they have emotions, that they fall in love with the white people, that they fall in love like white people do, that they want to be with their wives and children like white people want to be with theirs, and that they want to earn money to support their families properly, to feed and clothe them, and then send them to schools. And what house boy or garden boy or laborer can hope to this? Past laws, which to the African are among the most hated bits of legislation in South Africa, render any African liable to police surveillance at any time. I doubt whether this is a single African male in South Africa who has not at some stage had a brush with the police over his past. Hundreds and thousands of Africans are thrown into jail each year under past laws. Even worse than this is the fact that the past laws keeps husband and wife apart and lead to the breakdown of the family life. Poverty and breakdowns of the family life have secondary effects. Children wander
about the street of the township because they have no school to go to or no money to enable them to go to school, or no parents at home to see that they go to school, because both parents, if they were the two, have to work to keep the family alive. This leads to the breakdown of moral standards, to an alarming rise in the illegitimacy and growing violence which erupts not only politically but everywhere. Life in the township is dangerous. There is not a day that goes by without somebody being stabbed or assaulted, and violence is carried out on the township to the white living areas. People are afraid to walk alone in the streets after dark. House breaking and robberies are increasing, despite the fact that the death sentence can now be imposed for such a violence. Offense death sentence cannot cure the festering soul. African wants to be paid in living wage. African wants to perform work which they are capable of doing, and not work where the government declares them to be capable of. African wants to be allowed to live where they obtain work, not to be endorsed out of an area because they were not born there. Africans want to be allowed to own land in places where they work, and not to be obliged to live in a rented houses which they can never call their own. African want to be part of the general population and not confined to the living in their own ghettos. African men want to have their wives, children to live with them where they work and not be forced into unnatural existence in men's hostel. African women wants to be with the men folk and not be left permanently widowed in the reserve. African want to be allowed out after 11 o'clock at night and not be confined to their rooms like a little children. African wants to be allowed to travel in their own country and to seek work where they want to and not where the labor bureau tells them to. African wants to just share in the whole of South Africa. They want security and a stake in a society. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country because the majority of the voters would be Africans. This makes the white man fear democracy. But this fear cannot be allowed to stand in the way of the only solution which will guarantee racial harmony and freedom for all. It is not true that the enfranchisement of all will result in racial dominations. Political divisions based on color is entirely artificial, and when it disappears, so will the dominations of one color group by another. The ANC has spent half a century fighting against racialism. When it triumphs, it will not change that policy. This, then, is what the ANC is fighting. The struggle is truly a national one. It is a struggle of the African people, inspired by their own suffering and their own experience. It is a struggle for the right to live. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white dominations and I have fought against black dominations. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all person lives together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve it. But if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I'm prepared to die. It's a beautiful, beautiful speech. And I would like to repeat the last word again, right? Last sentence. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of an African people. I fought against white domination and I fought against black domination. I've cherished the ideal of the democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with an equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if it need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. By Nelson Mandela. It's a really a powerful and a beautiful speech, and it's a long speech, and I mean it took me close to 40-50 minutes, but Nelson Mandela took 3 hours, understandably, because he has to make people convinced. He has to go slow, and it was in 1964. Okay, it's way back, right? And then later he was sent to jail, and then in 1994 he was elected as a president around 1990, late 90s. And I want to search, okay, why did South Africa, okay, why is it that South Africa did not fight against the British like India and got independence early? Why did they have to wait in the 1990s? South Africa gained early independence from the British because power was transferred to a minority. Why is it that South Africa did not fight against? Okay, just wait. South Africa gained early independence from the Britain because power was transferred to a minority European settler population other than the indigenous black majority. In contrast, India, which fought a unified mass struggle to enforce, okay, South Africa early independence was a negotiated deal that established whites with minority large European. This one, South Africa, the presence of a large entrenched European settlers population, both British and Afrikaners to oppose, made Britain view the territory similar to Canada or Australia. In 1910s, Britain unified its colonies and the defeated Boer Republic. Okay, this India has a relatively small number of British administration soldiers mentioned, never experienced a large-scale European settlers colonies. Britain's primary goal in India was resource extraction, so naturally. Okay, so because of this one, okay, I want to know, okay. Before, okay, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, okay, president. Before Nelson Mandela election, were there any election between white people? I don't know. Is there any prime minister or something? Yes, for decades, during the apartheid, apartheid era, the South African held numerous elections where only the white minority was permitted to vote. The most significant one immediately preceding the 1994 multiracial democratic election was the 1992 whites-only referendum. 1992 whites-only referendum held in this one. 1992 white voters were asked to say yes or no on continuing reform aimed at ending apartheid and negotiating a new non-racial democratic institution. The yes side, championed by the president F.W. de Klerk, won with a roughly 68.7% of the vote in general election. Prior to 1994, regular parliamentary elections were held exclusively for the white citizens. Black South Africans were completely excluded from the national franchises, while colored and Indian after they have severely limited separate tribal. Okay, understood. Just wait, okay, I want to know. South Africa is famous for, I don't know, what is it famous for? South Africa is world renowned for its breathtaking natural landscape, diverse wildlife and rich history of the culture resilience, often referred to as the rainbow nations. Due to its incredible diversity, it's seamlessly blend vibrant modern cities with the untamed wilderness. The Big Five, home to world-class national parks, most notably Kruger National Parks, where you can spot lions, leopards, elephants, rhinos, and buffaloes in their natural habitats. Marine life is famous for the shark cage driving, especially in Guns, Cape Town's spectacular Table Mountains. Nelson Mandela, the country which is known globally as the birthplace of the anti-apartheid movement, symbolized by the historic sites like the Robben Islands and the legacy of the Nelson Mandela. Sporting dominance. Okay, economic and resources. Okay, distinction. Bry and Bilton. Okay, just wait. They're famous for. So there's a picture of it. It's mostly famous for the nature. Okay, and yeah. So this is the speech by the very famous person, Nelson Mandela. The next speech that I'm going to read now is by the first Prime Minister of independent India, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, and the speech name is Tryst with Destiny. And the speech was given by Jawaharlal Nehru at the exact stroke of midnight, transitioning from 14th of August to 15th of August, 1947, and it was delivered to the Constituent Assembly in the Parliament House in New Delhi. And the speech was given exactly as exactly at midnight, and not on the daytime or early morning of 15th of August, which was the official independence of India. Was because there was a concern with respect to a clashing political timelines and astrological concern. Lord Mountbatten's lucky dates. The last Viceroy of India, Lord Louis Mountbatten, was given the power to choose a date for the transfer of power. He insisted on August 15, 1947, because it marked the second anniversary of Japan's surrender to the Allied forces in the World War II, a victory he had personally overseen. He refused to change his date. And the other one is astrological objections. When the date was announced, the leading astrologers across India raised a massive outcry. According to Hindu calendar, August 15, 1947 was deemed as extremely inauspicious and unlucky day for a new nation to be born. And a midnight compromise. To honor Mountbatten's rigid deadline while bypassing the perceived bad omen, a clever workaround was created based on how different culture calculates the start of the day. The Western calendar, a new day begins at 12 a.m. midnight. And the Hindu calendar, a new day only begins at sunrise. So this was a clever workaround. And yeah, so this was given at midnight, and it was given by the Jawaharlal Nehru Prime Minister. And the title of the speech is A Tryst with Destiny. Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru inaugural speech addressed A Tryst with Destiny. And a tryst.
Tryst.
Meaning
an appointed meeting, especially between lovers. It's a tryst is a secret arranged meeting between lovers. It's like the rendezvous in French, rendezvous. And the speech goes like 14 August 1947. Long years ago, we made a tryst with the destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measures, but very substantially. At the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes which comes but rarely in history. Beautiful, beautiful. A moment comes which comes but rarely in history. I repeat, a moment comes which comes but rarely in history when we step out from the old to the new, where an age ends and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity. At the dawn of history, India started on her unending quest, and trackless centuries are filled with her striving and grandeur of her success and failure. Through good and ill fortune alike, she has never lost sight of that quest, forgotten the ideals which gave her strength. We end today a period of misfortunes, and India discovered herself again. The achievement we celebrate today is but a step, an opening of opportunity to the greater triumphs and achievement that awaits us. Are we brave enough and wise enough to grasp this opportunity and accept the challenge of the future? Freedom and power brings responsibility. The responsibility rests upon this assembly, a sovereign body representing the sovereign people of India. Before the birth of freedom, we have endured all the pains of labor, and our hearts are heavy with the memory of the sorrow. Some of those pains continue even now. Nevertheless, the past is over, and it is the future that beckons us now. That future is not one of ease or resting, but of incessant striving, so that we may fulfill the pledges we have so often taken, and the one will shake today. The one we shall take today. The service of India means the service of the millions who suffers. It means the ending of poverty and ignorance and poverty and disease and inequality of opportunities. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye that may be beyond us, but as long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. And so we have to labor and to work hard to give reality to our dreams. Those dreams are for India, but they are also for the world, for all the nations and the peoples that are too closely knit together today for any one of them to imagine that it can live apart. Peace is said to be indivisible. So is freedom. So is prosperity now, and also is a disaster in this one world that can no longer be split into isolated fragments. To the people of India, whose representative we are, we make an appeal to join us with faith and confidence in this great adventure. This is no time for petty and destructive criticism, no time for ill will or blaming others. We have to build the noble mission of free India, where all her children may dwell. The appointed day has come, the day appointed by destiny, and India stands forth again. After a long slumber and struggle, awake, vital, free and independent, the past clings on to us still in some measures, and we have to do much before we redeem the pledge we have so often taken. Yet the turning point is past, and history begins anew for us, the history which we shall live and act and others will write about. It is a fateful moment for us in India, for all Asia and for the world. A new star arises, the star of freedom in the east. A new hope comes into being. A vision long cherished materializes. May the star never set, and that hopes never be betrayed. We rejoice in that freedom, even though cloud surrounds us, and many of our people are sorrow-stricken and difficult problem encompasses us. But freedom brings responsibilities and burdens, and we have to face them in the spirit of a free and disciplined people. On this day, our first thought go to the architect of this freedom, the father of our nation, who, embodying the old spirit of India, held aloft the torch of freedoms and light up the darkness that surrounded us. We have often been unworthy followers of his and have strayed from his message, but only when we but succeeding generation will remember this message and bear the imprint of their hearts of this great son of India, magnificent in his faith and strength and courage and humility. We shall never allow the torch of freedom to be blown out, however high the wind or stormy the tempest. Our next thought must be the unknown volunteers and soldiers of freedom who, without praise or reward, have served India even unto death. We think also of our brothers and sisters who have been cut off from us by political boundaries and who unhappily cannot share at present in the freedom that has come. They are of us and will remain of us whatever may happen, and we shall be sharer in their good or ill fortune alike. The future beckons to us. Whither do we go, and what shall be our endeavor to bring freedom and opportunity to the common man, to the peasants and the workers of India, to fight and end the poverty and ignorance and disease, to build up a prosperous, democratic and progressive nations, and to create social, economic and political institutions which will ensure justice and fullness of life to every man and woman. We have work hard ahead. There is no resting for any of us till we redeem our pledge in full, till we make all the people of India what destiny intended them to be. We are citizens of a great country on the verge of a bold advance, and we have to live up to that high standards. All of us, to whatever religion we may be belong, are equally the children of India with equal rights, privileges, and obligations. We cannot encourage communalism or narrow-mindedness, for no nation can be great whose people are narrow in their thought or in actions. To the nations and the peoples of the world, we send greetings and pledge ourselves to cooperate with them in furthering peace, freedom and democracy. And to India, our much loved motherland, the ancient, the eternal and the ever new, we pay our reverent homage and we bind ourselves afresh to our service. Thank you. And this is a beautiful speech. This is a beautiful speech, and it's a short and it's very concise and it's to the point. And yeah, it was delivered by the first independent Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru.